The sun beat down mercilessly on the New Mexico desert, its rays reflecting off the parched earth like a furnace. Jackson Reed stood motionless, the brim of his weathered hat providing the only shade for his face, as he stared at the three men before him. Sweat trickled down his temple, but he made no move to wipe it away. His attention was fixed on the document being thrust toward him. "Mr. Reed, Horizon Rail has been more than generous," said the man in the center, his suit immaculate despite the heat. "This is our final offer. 5 times what this worthless patch of dirt is actually worth." Jackson's eyes, blue as the sky but hardened by years of seeing too much, didn't waver. "My answer hasn't changed, Mr. Porter. This land isn't for sale." The man in the suit, Porter, exchanged glances with his companions. The two men flanking him shifted their stances, hands drifting closer to their holsters. They weren't railroad men. Jackson had treated enough gunshot wounds to recognize hired muscle when he saw it. "That's unfortunate," Porter said, folding the document with deliberate care. "The company was hoping to resolve this amicably." "Nothing amicable about trying to force a man off his land," Jackson replied. The taller of the two gunmen stepped forward. "Maybe you need some time to reconsider your position, old man." In one fluid motion, the man drew his revolver and fired. The shot cracked through the still desert air. Jackson felt the bullet tear through his calf before the pain registered. He stumbled, but remained standing, refusing to fall before these men. "Next time," the gunman said, holstering his weapon, "we won't be aiming at your leg." The three mounted their horses, Porter taking one last look at Jackson. "1 week, Mr. Reed. Be reasonable. Sign the papers, or things will get considerably less pleasant." Jackson watched them ride away, dust billowing behind them. Only when they disappeared over the horizon did he allow himself to collapse onto the hard ground. His hands, once steady enough to perform surgery amid cannon fire, now trembled as he examined his wound. The bullet had passed clean through the fleshy part of his calf. Painful, but not life-threatening if he could prevent infection. He tore a strip from his shirt, fashioning a makeshift tourniquet. As he worked, his eyes drifted to the modest cabin he'd built with his own hands, to the small corral holding his 15 cattle. Thin creatures struggling to survive in this unforgiving land, and to the weathered sign beside his door that read, "Dr. Jackson Reed, medical assistance available." This was all he had left, all he'd allowed himself after everything. The pain throbbed as Jackson limped into his cabin. The interior was sparse but meticulously organized. Medical texts lined the rough-hewn shelves alongside jars of herbs and tinctures. A writing desk stood in one corner, papers covered with careful notations about treatments and remedies. This wasn't just a home, it was a sanctuary of knowledge. Jackson eased himself into a chair, reaching for his medical bag. He cleaned the wound thoroughly, gritting his teeth against the sting of alcohol. As a doctor, he knew what needed to be done, but treating oneself was never easy. He'd had plenty of practice, though. In the war, he'd often tended to his own injuries when others needed attention more urgently. The war. Even after 20 years, those memories remained vivid. The screams of the wounded, the endless parade of broken bodies, the amputations performed with dull saws when anesthesia ran out. Jackson had saved countless lives, but it was the ones he couldn't save that haunted him. With practiced hands, he stitched the entry and exit wounds, his mind drifting to the irony of his situation. A doctor who couldn't heal himself in the ways that truly mattered. Once bandaged, he stood gingerly testing his weight on the injured leg. It would hold. He'd endured worse. Jackson made his way to the window, gazing out at his parched land. The well was running dry like everything else. His cattle grew thinner by the day. Any rational man would have taken the railroad's money and started fresh elsewhere. But Jackson Reed had stopped being rational the day he buried his family. He limped to a small chest beside his bed, unlocking it with a key kept around his neck. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, a child's wooden toy, and a daguerreotype showing a woman with kind eyes and a young girl with her father's smile. Beside these treasured items sat his old medical journal from the war, the one he never opened anymore. 5 years had passed since the fever took them, yet the pain remained as fresh as an open wound. Elizabeth and Sarah, his wife and daughter, had died, while he desperately tried every treatment he knew, the great doctor powerless when it mattered most. Jackson carefully closed the chest without removing anything. Some wounds he preferred not to reopen tonight. Instead, he returned to his desk where an unfinished manuscript lay, a medical text combining traditional Western medicine with healing practices he'd observed among Native Americans, former slaves, and immigrant communities. Knowledge that could save lives if shared properly. He dipped his pen in ink and began to write, pushing away the pain in his leg, the memory of the gunman's threats, and the ever-present ghosts of his past. In these moments of focused work, he could almost forget that he was a broken man clinging to a worthless piece of land that somehow meant everything to him. Dawn broke with the promise of another scorching day. Jackson had slept poorly, his leg throbbing, and his mind circling through dark memories. He rose stiffly, checking his wound before wrapping it freshly. The first task of the day couldn't wait. Regardless of his injury, his cattle needed water. He filled several buckets from his precious well and limped to the corral. The animals crowded around, pushing against each other in their desperation. Jackson counted them out of habit, 15 thin, dusty beasts that were hardly worth the effort to keep alive. Yet, he couldn't bring himself to slaughter them or sell them off. They depended on him just as his patients once had. "Easy there," he murmured, as one particularly aggressive cow shoved the others aside. "There's enough for everyone." A lie, of course. There was never enough water, never enough feed, never enough of anything in this parched corner of the territory. But he would share what little he had, as he always did. As the sun climbed higher, Jackson retreated to the shade of his makeshift medical outpost, a lean-to attached to the cabin where he treated anyone who came seeking help. Few white settlers visited, preferring the doctor in town 20 miles away. But travelers sometimes stopped, as did Mexican laborers, and occasionally Navajo people moving quietly through the territory. Jackson never asked questions when someone needed treatment. He didn't care about a person's background, only their ailments. Medicine was the one pure thing left in his life, the one area where his actions could still make a difference. He was organizing his supplies when he heard the approach of horses. His hand instinctively moved toward the rifle kept under his examination table, but he relaxed when he recognized the visitors. It was Swift Hawk, an elderly Navajo man who periodically visited for treatment of a chronic chest pain, accompanied by his grandson. "Dr. Reed," Swift Hawk greeted him, dismounting with difficulty. Even in the heat, the old man wore a traditional blanket draped over his shoulders. "Swift Hawk," Jackson nodded, stepping forward to help the man to the shade. "Your chest bothering you again. The pain comes and goes, like an unwelcome guest," the old man replied, settling onto the bench Jackson provided. "But I bring something for you this time." The grandson, a boy of perhaps 12, handed a small bundle to Swift Hawk, who presented it to Jackson. Inside were dried herbs that Jackson immediately recognized as a powerful anti-inflammatory he had been unable to cultivate. "Where did you find this?" Jackson asked, examining the herbs with professional interest. Swift Hawk's weathered face creased in a smile. "Some secrets an old man must keep." Jackson nodded his understanding. Trust between them had boundaries, necessary ones in a territory where Native Americans were routinely displaced and persecuted. He didn't need to know where the plants grew, only how to use them effectively. As Jackson examined Swifthawk, checking his heartbeat and breathing, he noticed the old man studying his bandaged leg. "You are injured," Swifthawk observed. "It's nothing," Jackson replied. "A disagreement with some railroad men." Swifthawk's expression remained impassive, but his eyes reflected understanding. "The Iron Horse people want your land." "They've made offers before. This time they were more persuasive." The old man nodded slowly. "They seek a path through all our lands. The Iron Road brings more who want what little we have left." After a pause, he added, "You should have Morning Sky look at your wound. Her medicines would prevent the fire pain." Jackson recognized the Navajo term for infection. "I've treated it properly." "Two medicines are better than one," Swifthawk said simply. "She will be gathering herbs near the Red Cliffs tomorrow, if you wish to find her." After examining Swifthawk and providing him with a tincture that had helped in the past, Jackson watched the two Navajo visitors ride away. He considered the old man's words about Morning Sky, a healer he had heard of but never met. There had been a time when his medical pride would have dismissed such suggestions, but years of seeing various healing traditions work when his own methods failed had humbled him. Perhaps he would seek out this healer tomorrow. His leg was beginning to show the early signs of infection, despite his careful treatment. And, if he were honest with himself, he was curious about her knowledge. As dusk approached, Jackson sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in hues of orange and purple. In these moments, he could almost understand why he refused to leave this harsh, beautiful land. It wasn't just stubbornness or the memory of his family that kept him here. It was the solitude, the clarity of purpose. Here, he answered to no one, could treat anyone who needed help, and could research healing methods that more respectable doctors would scorn. The railroad men would return. Porter's threat had been clear enough. But Jackson had survived a war, an epidemic that took his family, and years of crushing solitude. He wouldn't be driven off by threats. As darkness fell, he returned to his manuscript, working by lamplight until his eyes grew heavy. Tomorrow, he decided he would seek out Morning Sky. Not because he believed in Navajo medicine over his own, but because only a fool rejected knowledge that might heal. The Red Cliffs rose from the desert floor like ancient sentinels, their surfaces glowing crimson in the morning light. Jackson had ridden out at dawn, following Swifthawk's vague directions, his medical bag secured to his saddle alongside his canteen and rifle. His injured leg protested with every movement of the horse, the infection spreading, despite his treatments. He scanned the base of the cliffs, looking for any sign of the Navajo healer. The landscape appeared deserted, except for the occasional lizard darting between rocks. Jackson was beginning to think he'd misunderstood Swifthawk's instructions when he spotted movement in a narrow ravine. Guiding his horse closer, he saw an elderly native woman carefully harvesting plants from a hidden patch of greenery fed by a small spring. She worked methodically, murmuring what sounded like prayers with each plant she took. Jackson approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Morning Sky!" he called when he was within earshot. The woman straightened, showing no surprise at his presence. Her face was deeply lined, her hair silver, but her eyes were sharp and assessing as they took in the white man on horseback. "Dr. Reed," she responded, speaking his title rather than his name. "Swifthawk said you might come." Jackson dismounted, wincing as his weight settled on his injured leg. "He suggested you might have something for my wound." "I have many things for many wounds," she replied cryptically. "Not all of them visible to the eye." Before Jackson could respond to this, A younger woman emerged from behind a rock formation. She appeared to be in her 20s, carrying a basket half filled with plants. Unlike the older woman, her expression was openly suspicious. "Grandmother, we should go," she said in English, eyeing Jackson warily. "It's not safe." "Nijoni," Morning Sky said calmly. "This is the medicine man Swift Hawk spoke of. He treats our people without asking payment." Nijoni's expression didn't soften. "He's still one of them." Jackson remained silent. He understood the younger woman's hostility. What reason had she to trust any white man, particularly one who appeared suddenly in their isolated gathering place? Morning Sky turned back to Jackson. "Show me your wound." He rolled up his pant leg, removing the bandage to reveal an angry red gash surrounded by inflamed skin. Morning Sky knelt to examine it, her fingers hovering just above the wound without touching it. "The metal brought poison," she said. "Your medicine fights it, but not strongly enough." She opened a small pouch at her waist, removing what looked like a paste made of crushed herbs. "This will draw out the poison. Keep it covered for 1 day and 1 night." As she applied the mixture to his wound, Jackson noticed Nijoni had moved closer, her curiosity apparently overcoming her distrust. "What plants are you using?" he asked Morning Sky. "Plants that grow where the earth remembers old pain," the elderly woman answered. "Like calls to like." Not for the first time, Jackson found himself both frustrated and intrigued by the poetic way Navajo healers described their methods. He wanted to know the specific plants, their properties, how they were prepared. Yet he respected that such knowledge was not freely given to outsiders. "Thank you," he said simply, as she finished wrapping his leg with a clean cloth. Morning Sky studied him with those penetrating eyes. "You seek more than healing for your leg, medicine man. You seek healing for your spirit." Jackson stiffened. "I'm just trying to survive like everyone else." "No," she said. "Others flee from their pain. You built your home upon yours like a man who constructs his house atop his own grave." The accuracy of her assessment struck uncomfortably close to home. Before Jackson could formulate a response, a sound stopped all three of them. The distant but unmistakable growl of a mountain lion. Nijoni moved quickly to her grandmother's side. "We need to leave." Morning Sky nodded, gathering her things with calm efficiency. Jackson scanned the surrounding cliffs, trying to locate the source of the growl. Mountain lions typically avoided humans, but hunger or territorial instincts could override that caution. "I'll escort you to safer ground," he offered, reaching for his rifle. "We know these lands better than you," Nijoni replied sharply. "We don't need your—" Her words cut off as a tawny shape appeared on a ledge directly above them. A large female mountain lion muscles tensed for a leap. In the split second before the animal pounced, Jackson saw that it was unnaturally thin, its ribs visible beneath its coat. Hunger had made it desperate. "Run!" he shouted, raising his rifle. Everything happened at once. The mountain lion launched itself toward the women. Nijoni pushed her grandmother behind a boulder. Jackson fired, but the animal was already airborne, and his shot only grazed its shoulder. The wounded cat crashed into Nijoni, sending both of them tumbling across the rocky ground. Jackson dropped his rifle and grabbed the only weapon at hand. A wooden stake he'd brought to mark medicinal plant locations. As the mountain lion recovered and prepared to attack the fallen woman, Jackson thrust himself between them. The cat lunged. Jackson drove the stake forward with all his strength. He felt the wood pierce flesh, heard the animal's shriek of pain. Then claws raked across his chest as the wounded predator fought back in desperate fury. Jackson fell backward, the mountain lion's weight driving him to the ground. Its jaws snapped inches from his face. as he held it at bay, with the stake still embedded in its chest. Blood, both his and the animal's, soaked his shirt. With one final desperate push, he drove the stake deeper. The mountain lion convulsed, then went still, its golden eyes fixed on nothing. Jackson lay beneath the dead animal, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The pain from his chest wounds and infected leg merged into a single symphony of agony. With effort, he pushed the carcass aside and struggled to his knees. Najoni was helping her grandmother from behind the boulder. Both women stared at Jackson with expressions he couldn't interpret. Not fear or gratitude, but something closer to recognition, as if they had expected this exact scene to unfold. Morning Sky approached him slowly. She knelt beside him, examining the claw marks across his chest. 3 wounds, she murmured, just as I saw. Grandmother, Najoni began, but the older woman silenced her with a gesture. Morning Sky's eyes locked with Jackson's. You have come at last, the one my vision showed me. I don't understand. Jackson managed his vision beginning to blur from pain and blood loss. You will, the old woman replied. The chief has been waiting for you, Jackson Reed. These words made no sense to him. He had never met any Navajo chief, never even spoken to any Navajo, beyond casual medical interactions like those with Swift Hawk. Yet somehow these women acted as if they knew exactly who he was, as if this entire encounter, the mountain lion, his intervention, even his injury, had been foretold. We need to stop that bleeding, Najoni said, approaching with a bundle of cloth from her gathering basket. Unlike before, there was no hostility in her voice, only professional assessment. As she began cleaning his wounds with surprising skill, Jackson noticed something on the ground near the mountain lion's body, a small carved object now stained with blood. Najoni followed his gaze and picked it up. A marker, she said, turning it in her fingers. Not Navajo. Morning Sky took the object, studying the markings carved into its surface. The railroad men. They drive the great cats from their hunting grounds, send them to unfamiliar territories where they become desperate. Her eyes met Jackson's. They create suffering that spreads like ripples in water. Jackson wanted to ask more questions, but the world was beginning to spin around him. He heard Najoni's voice, as if from a great distance. He's lost too much blood. We need to get him back to our village. The last thing he saw before consciousness slipped away was Morning Sky's face. Her ancient eyes filled with something that looked remarkably like hope. Jackson drifted in and out of consciousness, catching fragments of his surroundings. The rhythmic motion of being carried, voices speaking in Navajo, the smell of sage and smoke, pain lancing through his chest and leg whenever he was moved. When he finally came fully awake, he found himself lying on a soft bed of furs inside what appeared to be a traditional Navajo dwelling. Sunlight filtered through the smoke hole above, illuminating the circular interior. His chest had been bandaged with clean cloth, his leg re-wrapped with a fresh application of the herbal paste. He attempted to sit up, only to fall back, as pain shot through his upper body. "You should remain still," a voice advised. The cat's claws went deep. Jackson turned his head to see Najoni sitting nearby, grinding herbs with a stone mortar and pestle. Her earlier hostility seemed to have vanished, replaced by the focused attention of a healer tending to a patient. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice rough from thirst. "Our village." She set aside her work and brought him a clay cup filled with water. "Hidden from those who would harm us." Jackson drank gratefully, then asked, "How long have I been unconscious?" "1 day and 1 night," Najoni answered. "Your fever broke this morning." He realized she was right. The infection that had been burning through his system had receded. Whatever was in Morning Sky's herbal treatment had worked more effectively than his own medicines. "Thank you," he said, "for treating my wounds." Njoni's expression remained neutral. "You saved my grandmother's life and mine. It was the least we could do." After a pause, she added, "Though many in our village questioned bringing a white man here, even an injured one." Before Jackson could respond, the entrance flap of the dwelling opened, and a tall, powerfully built Navajo man entered. He wore the clothing of a warrior, and his stern face showed no welcome for the stranger in their midst. "The chief wishes to see him," the man announced, addressing Njoni while barely glancing at Jackson. "He is still weak, Thunderstone," she replied. "Perhaps tomorrow would be—" "Now," Thunderstone interrupted. "The council is gathered." Njoni sighed, but nodded. "Help me get him up, then." With Thunderstone's reluctant assistance, Jackson was brought to his feet. The room spun momentarily, but he forced himself to remain upright. His shirt was gone, replaced by a simple blanket draped over his bandaged chest. He noticed his medical bag had been placed beside his bed, apparently brought from his horse. "I need a moment," he said, reaching for the bag. Thunderstone looked ready to object, but Njoni nodded. "Quickly!" Jackson opened his bag and removed a small vial containing a tincture of willow bark, a natural pain reliever he had prepared himself. He swallowed a measured dose, then allowed himself to be led outside. The Navajo village was unlike any native settlement Jackson had seen before. Nestled in a hidden valley surrounded by red stone formations, it was completely invisible unless you were already inside it. Traditional hogans stood alongside more permanent wooden structures, showing adaptation to prolonged residence. A clear stream ran through the center of the settlement, and small garden plots were carefully tended near each dwelling. What struck Jackson most was the atmosphere of purposeful activity. Women worked at looms or prepared food, men crafted tools or tended to horses in a corral, children played or helped with chores. This wasn't a temporary camp or a reservation. It was a thriving community that had managed to preserve its way of life away from white oversight. As he was led through the village, activity slowed as people turned to stare at the stranger. Jackson felt their gazes, some curious, others openly hostile. He couldn't blame them for their suspicion. History had given the Navajo ample reason to distrust white men. They approached a large circular clearing where several older men and women sat in a semicircle around a small central fire. At the center, seated on a simple wooden chair, was a man who could only be the chief. He appeared to be in his 70s, with silver hair and deep lines etched into his face by time and experience. Despite his age, he sat straight-backed, his dark eyes alert and penetrating. "Standing Arrow." Njoni addressed the chief with obvious respect. "This is the medicine man who saved us from the mountain lion." The chief studied Jackson with an intensity that seemed to look beyond physical appearance. "Dr. Jackson Reed," he said in clear, unaccented English. "At last we meet. Please sit." Jackson was guided to a place across from the chief. The pain medication was beginning to take effect, making it easier to focus on the extraordinary situation in which he found himself. "You know my name," Jackson observed. It wasn't a question. Chief Standing Arrow nodded. "We have been watching you for some time, Doctor. 2 years to be precise. Watching me, why? To determine what kind of man you are." The chief replied simply, "Many white men have passed through our territories. Most bring destruction whether they intend it or not. But occasionally we find one who walks a different path." But Jackson glanced around the council circle, noting the mix of expressions ranging from curiosity to outright distrust. "And what have you determined about me?" "That you are a man carrying a great burden," Standing Arrow said. that you treat all who come to you regardless of their race or standing, that you've refused 3 offers to sell your land to the railroad men despite having little reason to stay. The accuracy of this assessment was unsettling. You've been watching me closely. We have had to become observant to survive, the chief replied. But there is more you should understand. He gestured to a younger man sitting beside him who handed him a leather document case. From it, Standing Arrow removed several official-looking papers. What do you know about the railroad men who want your land, Dr. Reed? Only that they're persistent, Jackson answered, and now, apparently, willing to use force. They seek more than your small ranch, Standing Arrow said, spreading the documents before him. Your land sits on the most direct route between their eastern holdings and the territory they wish to claim here in our valley. Understanding dawned on Jackson. My property is worthless for farming or ranching, but as a transportation corridor— Precisely. The chief nodded. Without it, they would have to travel an extra 2 days around the mesa formations. Time is money for these men. Jackson considered this information. But why would they want access to this valley? It seems isolated with little to offer commercial interests. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Standing Arrow's face, something like grim amusement. They believe we are squatters who can be removed at will. He handed Jackson one of the documents. They are mistaken. Jackson examined the paper and couldn't hide his surprise. It was a land patent, an official title to the land granted by the territorial government 15 years earlier. The document recognized the Navajo band led by Standing Arrow as the legal owners of the valley and surrounding territories. This is unusual, Jackson said carefully, knowing how rare it was for Native Americans to hold legal title to land. It was granted in exchange for our service as scouts during the Apache campaigns, Standing Arrow explained. Many promises made to our people have been broken, but this one was recorded in writing with the proper seals and signatures. Jackson handed the document back, his mind racing with implications. The railroad doesn't know about this. They suspect something, Thunderstone spoke up from behind Jackson. Why else would they mark territory that isn't theirs? Jackson recalled the carved object found near the mountain lion. The marker Najoni found. Standing Arrow nodded. They have been placing these throughout the region, claiming land that legally belongs to us. Land they have no right to take. But legal ownership means little if you cannot defend what is yours, another council member added. They have many men political connections, and the territory's appetite for progress on their side. Jackson was beginning to understand why he had been brought here, yet many questions remained. What does any of this have to do with me? I'm just one man with a small piece of land. A piece of land that controls the only practical route for moving their equipment and supplies into this valley. Standing Arrow replied. Without it, their expansion becomes much more difficult and expensive. A silence fell over the council circle as Jackson absorbed this information. He was a pawn in a much larger game than he had realized, one with stakes far beyond his personal stubbornness about keeping his homestead. What exactly are you proposing? He finally asked, though he suspected he already knew. An alliance, Standing Arrow said simply. You continue to hold your land, but under our protection. In exchange, you help us defend this valley from those who would take it. The offer surprised Jackson. He had expected them to ask him to sell his land to them, or perhaps to abandon it entirely. What kind of help do you imagine I could provide? I'm a doctor, not a fighter. You were a military surgeon during the war between states, the chief replied. You have knowledge of the white man's laws and ways of thinking, and you have demonstrated courage that cannot be taught. Jackson frowned. How do you know about my military service? Attention seemed to fall over the council. Standing Arrow exchanged glances with several elders before answering. "We know many things about you, Dr. Reed, some of which you may wish we did not." Before Jackson could press for clarification, Thunderstone stepped forward. Chief riders approach from the east, many men heavily armed. The atmosphere in the council circle changed instantly. Orders were given in rapid Navajo, and the village erupted into organized activity. Women gathered children, men collected weapons, lookouts were posted. "What's happening?" Jackson asked, struggling to his feet. "The railroad men," Standing Arrow explained, rising with surprising agility for his age. "They move toward your ranch. It seems they have tired of waiting for your answer." A cold realization washed over Jackson. "They're going to destroy my property." "Yes," the chief confirmed. "They will eliminate any obstacle to their plans." Jackson felt a surge of anger unlike anything he had experienced in years. His ranch might be small, his cattle scrawny, his life lonely, but they were his. The result of years of struggle and persistence after losing everything that truly mattered. "I need to get back there," he said, his decision made in an instant. "In your condition," Najoni asked incredulously, "you can barely stand." "It's my home," Jackson insisted. "Everything I've worked for." Standing Arrow studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Thunderstone gathered 12 of our best riders. Dr. Reed will guide us to his ranch by the fastest route." Thunderstone looked ready to protest, but obeyed with a short nod. Najoni disappeared briefly, returning with Jackson's shirt, cleaned and mended, and his boots. "This is foolish," she told him, as she helped him dress careful of his bandaged wounds. "Your injuries need time to heal." "Some wounds never heal," Jackson replied quietly, "but I've learned to live with them." Within minutes, the peaceful valley transformed into controlled chaos. Warriors emerged with rifles and ammunition. Horses were saddled with practiced efficiency. Women prepared supplies, anticipating that injured men might return. As Jackson was helped onto a horse, Morning Sky approached him. "You ride toward your past as much as your property," she said cryptically. "Be prepared for what you will find there." Before Jackson could ask what she meant, Thunderstone called for them to move out. The pain in his chest and legs screamed with every movement of the horse, but Jackson set his jaw against it. As they rode out of the hidden valley, he felt a strange mixture of emotions: anger at the railroad's aggression, anxiety about what they might find, and something unexpected purpose. For the first time in 5 years, Jackson Reed was fighting for something beyond mere survival. Whether he had chosen this conflict or it had chosen him, he was committed now. The moment of decision had arrived sooner than anyone expected, and he had made his choice not in the calm of the council fire, but in the heat of immediate crisis. The ride to his ranch took nearly an hour, pushing through terrain that Jackson had traversed countless times alone. Now he moved with a company of skilled Navajo warriors united in common cause against a threat that endangered them all. As they crested the final ridge overlooking his property, the scene below made Jackson's blood run cold. Smoke rose from his barn, fully engulfed in flames. His cabin showed broken windows and a partially collapsed roof. Men on horseback, at least 15 of them, moved around the property with the confidence of those who expected no resistance. From his vantage point, Jackson could see his cattle scattered across the property. Several lay motionless on the ground, shot for sport, rather than necessity. Years of work, the modest life he had built from nothing, all being systematically destroyed as a message. "They want you to see this destruction," Standing Arrow observed, riding up beside him. "This is their demonstration of what happens to those who refuse their offers." One of the riders below spotted them on the ridge. Shouts carried across the distance as the group hurriedly formed a defensive line, rifles raised. "What's the plan?" Jackson asked, his voice tight with anger. Chief Standing Arrow studied the terrain with tactical precision. "They chose their position poorly," he noted. "Good view of approaches, but no protection from crossfire." He spoke rapidly in Navajo, and immediately half of the warriors split off, circling wide to flank the railroad men, while the rest prepared to advance directly. "We're not trying to kill them all," Standing Arrow explained to Jackson. "We want survivors to deliver a message back to their employers." "What message?" Jackson asked, checking the rifle Thunderstone had provided him. The chief's eyes were hard as stone. "That Jackson Reed is no longer alone." The attack came with devastating precision. As Standing Arrow's main group rode down the slope in a frontal assault, the flanking warriors opened fire from the eastern ridge. Caught between two forces, the railroad's hired guns found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned. Jackson rode with the main group, his doctor's instinct to preserve life temporarily overshadowed by cold fury. He fired with calculated precision, aiming to wound rather than kill, not from mercy, but because a dead man carried no messages. The firefight lasted less than 10 minutes. When it ended, 5 of the raiders lay wounded, while the rest had fled, abandoning their injured companions and their equipment. Jackson dismounted, painfully surveying the wreckage of his property with mixed emotions. His barn was beyond saving. The roof of his cabin partially collapsed. Worst of all, his medical texts and research notes were scattered across the ground, many burned or ruined by weather exposure. "Your cattle," Thunderstone called, riding up from the eastern pasture. "5 survive. The rest—" He gestured toward the scattered carcasses. 5 animals out of 15. It should have been devastating, but Jackson felt an odd sense of relief. 5 cattle were enough to start over, especially with the support he now had. As Navajo warriors secured the wounded raiders, Standing Arrow approached one, a young man barely out of his teens who clutched a bullet wound in his shoulder. "Tell your employers," the chief said clearly, "that this land belongs to Dr. Reed and the Navajo Nation jointly. Any further trespassing will be considered an act of war." The wounded man nodded frantically, eager to escape with his life. "And tell them," Jackson added, surprised by the authority in his own voice, "that the route through this territory is permanently closed to their operations." As the raiders were allowed to leave, the wounded helped onto horses by their less injured companions, Jackson stood amid the ruins of his old life. The cabin where he had lived in isolation. The barn where he had stored his meager supplies. The land where he had buried his grief along with his family. Everything was changed now. The railroad had forced his hand, but in doing so, they had given him something unexpected. A cause beyond himself. People who needed him not just as a doctor, but as an ally. Standing Arrow stood beside him, both men watching as Thunderstone and the others collected what could be salvaged from the ruins. "What happens now?" Jackson asked. "You come back with us," the chief replied. "Your cattle will have better grazing and water in our valley. Your skills as a healer will benefit our people, and together we will prepare for the railroad's next move." Jackson nodded slowly, his decision crystallizing. "They won't stop because we drove off their hired guns. They'll bring legal challenges, claim I'm harboring hostiles, petition the territorial authorities for military intervention." "Yes," Standing Arrow agreed. "But there is a way to protect both you and our people." He gestured to a warrior who carried the leather document case from earlier. "You can become a legal partner in our holdings. Your name alongside ours on the land patents. Your residence officially established within our territory. Jackson understood the implications. That would make any attack on me an attack on legally recognized Navajo property. The territorial government would be required to investigate and prosecute, Standing Arrow confirmed. It would not prevent all threats, but it would create obstacles for our enemies. A week ago, Jackson would have found the idea preposterous, legally binding himself to a Navajo community, abandoning his isolated existence. But the events of the past days had shifted something fundamental within him. The mountain lion attack, the discovery of the hidden village, the raid on his property, all had conspired to push him toward this moment of choice. As he looked at the smoking remains of his homestead, Jackson realized there was little left to hold him here. His research notes could be rewritten. His medical practice could continue elsewhere. What mattered were the principles at stake. The right of people to live peacefully on land they legally owned, the defense against those who used violence and lies to take what they wanted. "I accept your offer," he said, finally meeting Standing Arrow's gaze. "But I want to understand exactly what we're fighting for." The chief gestured toward the valley they had come from, invisible beyond the distant ridges. "We're fighting for the right to determine our own destiny," he said simply, "for the principle that justice should protect those who honor the law, not those who break it." As Jackson gathered what few possessions had survived the attack, his medical bag, a handful of salvaged books, a metal box containing his family's mementos, he felt the weight of his decision settling around him like a mantle of responsibility. 3 days ago, he had been a failing rancher with no friends, no future, and no hope beyond enduring another day. Now he was stepping into something larger than himself, a conflict that would test not just his courage, but his conviction that different peoples could stand together against a common threat. The sun was setting as they prepared to return to the Navajo village, painting the desert in hues of gold and crimson. Jackson mounted his horse with difficulty, his wounds protesting every movement. As they rode away, he allowed himself one last look at the place that had been his home and prison for 5 long years. Morning Sky's words came back to him. "You ride toward your past as much as your property." At the time, he hadn't understood. Now, as he left the physical reminders of his isolation behind, he wondered what aspects of his past awaited him in the days ahead. Standing Arrow and the Council clearly knew things about him, things he might wish they did not. What secrets would emerge as this alliance deepened, with the ruins of his ranch disappearing behind him? Jackson turned his face toward the hidden valley. Whatever lay ahead, confrontation with the railroad legal battles or the uncovering of his own buried past, he would face it with allies rather than alone. For the first time in years, Jackson Reed was moving forward rather than merely standing his ground. As the moon rose high overhead, the small party made their way back through the shadowed canyons leading to the hidden valley. They traveled in relative silence, each rider lost in their own thoughts about the day's events and what would come next. Jackson's injuries throbbed in rhythm with his horse's gait, but the willow bark tincture he'd taken earlier dulled the worst of the pain. The narrow entrance to the valley appeared before them like a gash in the rock face, virtually invisible until they were almost upon it. Thunderstone led them through the winding passage that opened suddenly to reveal the settlement spread below. Lights from cook fires dotted the valley floor, and Jackson could hear distant voices. Life continuing, despite the threat that loomed over them all. The hidden valley looked different to Jackson now as they returned. Where before he had seen a native settlement tucked away from white society, he now recognized a community that had found a way to preserve its traditions while adapting to changing circumstances. The stream that ran through its center wasn't merely a water source, but a lifeline. The gardens weren't just plots of food, but a statement of permanence. The mixture of traditional hogans and wooden structures spoke of a people honoring their past while facing their future. As they rode in, Jackson's 5 surviving cattle were guided to a pasture where other animals grazed on grass more lush than anything his own land had offered. For the first time in months, he watched his livestock drink their fill without worrying about conserving water for tomorrow. "They'll recover quickly here," Najoni observed, riding alongside him. "Good grass, clean water protection from both predators and men." Jackson nodded, still processing the dramatic shift in his circumstances. 3 days ago, he had been a solitary man fighting a losing battle against drought and railroad interests. Now he was entering into a legal alliance with a Navajo community that had been observing him for years. As they dismounted, Jackson's injuries reasserted themselves. The ride and the firefight had taken their toll, reopening the claw wounds on his chest and aggravating his bullet wound. He swayed on his feet, darkness threatening the edges of his vision. "You need rest," Najoni said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Your wounds won't heal if you keep tearing them open." This time Jackson didn't resist, as she and another Navajo woman helped him back to the dwelling where he had first awakened. His body had reached its limits, and even his stubborn will couldn't override its demands any longer. Inside the hogan, Najoni checked his bandages, applying fresh herbal paste to the infected leg wound and cleaning the reopened claw marks. "You're fortunate," she commented as she worked. "The cat's claws missed anything vital." "Fortunate," Jackson repeated with a weak laugh. "My home is destroyed, my research ruined, most of my cattle dead. I'm not sure 'fortunate' is the word I'd choose." Najoni's hands paused briefly. "You're alive," she said simply. "Many in your position would not be." The statement hung in the air between them, carrying unspoken weight. Jackson sensed there was more to her words than a simple observation about his current injuries. "Your grandmother said you lost your husband," he ventured carefully. Najoni's expression remained neutral, but her hands tensed slightly. "And my son," she added, resuming her work. "3 winters ago, soldiers mistook our hunting party for raiders." Jackson closed his eyes, the familiar weight of shared human suffering settling over him. "I'm sorry." "Your sympathy changes nothing," she replied, though without hostility. It was a statement of fact, not accusation. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." They fell into silence as she continued treating his wounds. Despite her initial wariness, Najoni's hands were gentle and skilled. Jackson recognized the confidence of a practiced healer. "You were trained as a medicine woman," he observed. She nodded. "From childhood. My grandmother saw the gift in me early." "Your treatments are effective," Jackson acknowledged. "The infection in my leg is already improving more than it would have with my methods." A hint of pride crossed her features. "Our medicines have served our people for generations. Long before white doctors came with their bleeding bowls and mercury potions." Jackson smiled faintly at the jab. "Medicine evolves. In the war, I saw doctors still using techniques from the last century, while others were discovering antiseptic methods that saved countless lives." "And which kind were you?" Najoni asked, wrapping a clean bandage around his chest. "I tried to be the latter," Jackson answered. "I questioned established practices when they failed. I learned from army surgeons, immigrant doctors, freed slave healers, anyone who had knowledge that could save lives." "And now from Navajo healers," she added, tying off the bandage. "Now from Navajo healers," he confirmed. As Najoni prepared to leave, Jackson asked the question that had been troubling him since the council meeting. "Your chief said you've been watching me for 2 years. Why?" She paused at the entrance. That is for Standing Arrow to explain when you're stronger. After a brief hesitation, she added, Rest now. Tomorrow will bring challenges enough. Left alone, Jackson settled back on the fur bedding, his body grateful for the chance to recover. Outside, he could hear the sounds of the village. Children playing, women talking, men working. Normal life continuing, despite the threat hanging over them all. Before sleep claimed him, his thoughts turned to the documents he had seen. The land patents granting legal ownership to Standing Arrow's people. Such recognition was rare, almost unheard of in these times. The Navajo had something valuable, something worth protecting. And now, for better or worse, so did he. Jackson awoke to the smell of cooking meat and the soft murmur of voices outside. Sunlight streamed through the smoke hole above, indicating it was well past dawn. He tested his limbs, finding the pain in his chest, and leg had dulled to a manageable ache. As he carefully sat up, the entrance flap opened, and Morning Sky entered, carrying a wooden bowl of stew. You heal quickly, for one who carries so many wounds, she observed. Your medicines helped, Jackson replied, accepting the bowl gratefully. The elderly woman settled nearby, watching him eat with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see more than physical appearance. You have questions, she stated. Jackson nodded. Many, but I'll start with one. What did you mean when you said I was the one your vision showed you? Morning Sky was silent for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. I have been blessed, or perhaps cursed, with dreams that show what may come. Not all dreams speak truth, but some carry messages from the world beyond this one. Jackson had encountered similar beliefs among various peoples he had treated. While his medical training made him skeptical of supernatural claims, he had learned to respect the cultural frameworks that gave them meaning. And you dreamed of me, he asked. I dreamed of a healer with blood on his hands, she replied, who would stand between our people and destruction. A man who had failed to save those he loved, yet would help save those he barely knew. Jackson felt a chill despite the warmth of the Hogan. The description was uncomfortably accurate. These railroad men, they're the destruction you foresaw. They are part of it, Morning Sky acknowledged. But not all. The true danger lies deeper. She rose to her feet with surprising agility for her age. Come, you are strong enough now, and the council is gathering. Standing Arrow will explain what you need to know. With some effort, Jackson stood. His clothes had been cleaned and mended again, and he dressed carefully, mindful of his bandages. Before leaving, he reached for his medical bag, a habit born of years never knowing when his skills might be needed. Outside, the village was alive with activity. Jackson noticed immediately that something had changed since the previous day. Warriors stood watch at various points around the perimeter, women worked with more urgency, and there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. What's happened? He asked Morning Sky as they walked. Riders were spotted near the valley entrance, she replied. Scouts, not warriors. They did not find the path in, but they search for it. The railroad men already looking for a way to strike back. Jackson wasn't surprised. Men like Porter didn't accept defeat easily. As they approached the council area, Jackson saw Standing Arrow seated with several tribal elders. Thunderstone stood nearby, engaged in serious conversation with other warriors. All fell silent as Jackson and Morning Sky arrived. Dr. Reed, the chief greeted him, gesturing to the same place Jackson had occupied during their first meeting. You look stronger today. I feel stronger, Jackson replied, taking his seat. Thanks to your people's care. Standing Arrow nodded acknowledgement. We have much to discuss. Events move more quickly than anticipated. Jackson glanced at the gathered faces, noting the gravity of their expressions. The railroad scouts. Yes, the chief confirmed. But there is more. One of our people who trades in the white settlement returned with troubling news. The railroad company has filed formal complaints with the territorial authorities claiming that Navajo raiders attacked their survey team and burned a white settler's property. That's a complete inversion of the truth, Jackson said, anger rising in him. Truth matters little when power speaks, an elderly council member observed. Standing Arrow continued, They claim you have been kidnapped or killed by our warriors, and they demand military intervention to rescue any survivors and punish those responsible. The implications were clear. If soldiers came looking for a kidnapped white doctor and found him living among the Navajo, it would be difficult to convince them of the truth. We need to get ahead of this, Jackson said. I should ride to the territorial office immediately, show them I'm alive and well, and file my own complaint about the destruction of my property. A Thunderstone shook his head. The military detachment at Fort Wilson has already been ordered to investigate. They will reach your ranch by tomorrow. Jackson considered this development. Then I should meet them there. Explain what really happened. And if they do not believe you, Thunderstone challenged, if they see a white man who has gone native and lost his reason. It was a fair concern. Lone settlers who formed alliances with native peoples were often viewed with suspicion by other whites, assumed to have either been coerced or to have abandoned their civilization. There is another complication, Standing Arrow said quietly. He exchanged glances with several elders before continuing. The commander who leads the Fort Wilson detachment. His name is Captain William Hayes. The name struck Jackson like a physical blow. Images flooded his mind. A valley filled with gunfire, the screams of women and children, a young officer giving orders with cold efficiency. Whispering Mesa, the darkest day of his military service. You know this man, Standing Arrow observed, watching Jackson's reaction closely. Yes, Jackson admitted, his voice barely audible. I know him, and if he's involved, our situation is far worse than I imagined. The council members exchanged glances. Morning Sky's eyes held a knowing sadness, as if a piece of her vision was coming to fruition. Tell us, Standing Arrow urged. Jackson took a deep breath, preparing to speak of events he had spent years trying to forget. Hayes was a lieutenant when I knew him during the war. Ambitious, ruthless. After the war ended, he stayed in the army, transferred west. I was assigned as a surgeon to his company during campaigns against native resistance. He paused, the memories painful to resurrect. 8 years ago, Hayes led an attack on a Navajo encampment at a place called Whispering Mesa. He claimed they were hostiles responsible for raids on white settlements. But when we arrived, Jackson's voice faltered. They were families, Thunderstone finished for him. Women, children, old ones, not warriors. Jackson looked up, startled. You know of this? I was there, Thunderstone said, his voice hard as iron. Hidden in the rocks, I watched your soldiers slaughter my first wife, my brother, my mother. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Jackson felt the weight of every eye upon him, judging, assessing. I tried to stop it, he said finally. When I realized what was happening, I confronted Hayes, told him these were clearly non-combatants. He ordered me to return to my medical duties or face charges of insubordination. And did you? Thunderstone demanded. Return to your duties. Jackson met his gaze unflinchingly. No, I began hiding survivors in my medical tent, claiming they were wounded and needed treatment. I managed to save 17 people that day, mostly children and a few women. It wasn't enough, but it was all I could do. Standing Arrow leaned forward. These survivors, do you know what became of them? I helped them escape during the night, Jackson answered. Gave them supplies, pointed them toward Navajo lands to the west. I never knew if they made it to safety. The chief exchanged meaningful glances with several elders. They found their way to us, he said. Among them was my youngest granddaughter and her son. Jackson felt a surge of emotion, relief that some good had come from that terrible day, that his small act of defiance had saved at least a few lives. Hayes was furious when he discovered the patients were gone, Jackson continued. He suspected me, but couldn't prove anything. Shortly after I resigned my commission, couldn't be part of a military that would condone such actions. I never saw Hayes again. Until now, Standing Arrow said grimly. He left the army 2 years ago to work for the railroad interests. Now he returns as a captain of militia, with the authority of the territorial government behind him. The full picture became horrifyingly clear to Jackson. This isn't just about a railroad route, is it? Hayes recognized your people's connection to the survivors of Whispering Mesa. He wants to eliminate witnesses to his crimes. And to acquire our land, Standing Arrow added. The railroad seeks more than passage through this valley. He gestured to Thunderstone, who unrolled a rough map drawn on animal hide. We have discovered why they are so determined, the warrior explained, pointing to a mountain at the northern edge of their territory. Turquoise Mountain, sacred to our people for generations. Recently, our scouts found white men taking samples from its slopes. They seek the blue stones and more. Copper, Jackson realized. Where turquoise is found, copper often lies beneath. Standing Arrow nodded. A copper mine would bring great wealth to the railroad and its investors. They would destroy our sacred mountain and poison our water with their digging. The stakes were even higher than Jackson had imagined. Not just land and safety, but the preservation of a sacred site and protection of the water that sustained the entire valley. Hayes must have recognized the potential value of this area during the campaigns years ago, Jackson said. He's been planning this, waiting for the opportunity. And now he comes with soldiers at his back and the story of a white doctor kidnapped by savages, Thunderstone concluded bitterly. Jackson absorbed the gravity of their situation. Hayes wasn't just any opponent. He was a man with military training, government connections, and knowledge of both Navajo weaknesses and the terrain. Most dangerously, he was a man with crimes to cover up, which made him willing to go to any lengths. "What do you propose we do?" Jackson asked Standing Arrow. The chief was silent for a moment, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. "We must fight on 2 fronts," he said finally. "With weapons if necessary, but primarily with the white man's own laws. We have legal title to this land. We have a white witness, you, to testify about the railroad's aggression. We must use these advantages before Hayes can destroy the evidence. I should meet with the soldiers when they arrive at my ranch tomorrow," Jackson suggested. "As a free man, not a captive. Show them my wounds, tell them what really happened." Several council members nodded approval, but Thunderstone remained skeptical. "Hayes will twist your words, say you've been bewitched or threatened into cooperation." "Not if I bring evidence," Jackson replied. "The marker found by the mountain lion's body proves the railroad was driving predators into Navajo territory, and the bullet wound in my leg came from Porter's men, not any Navajo." Standing Arrow considered this approach. "You would need warriors to accompany you, for protection and to show our strength. Thunderstone will lead them." Thunderstone's expression tightened, but he didn't object. Despite his obvious distrust of Jackson, understandable given their shared history, he accepted his chief's decision. As the council continued discussing strategy, Nijoni approached with a bundle of supplies. "If you're determined to ride tomorrow, you'll need these," she said, handing Jackson fresh bandages and medicine. "And you should let me check your wounds again before you leave." Her practical concern, devoid of her earlier suspicion, reminded Jackson of field nurses he'd worked with during the war, professionals who put the care of patients above personal feelings. "Thank you," he said sincerely. She acknowledged his thanks with a slight nod, then addressed Standing Arrow. "Grandfather Swift Hawk has returned from the trading post with more news." Jackson looked up sharply at the familial term. He hadn't realized Najoni was Standing Arrow's granddaughter, which meant Morning Sky was the chief's mother-in-law. Swift Hawk, the elderly Navajo who had visited Jackson's ranch for medical treatment, entered the council circle. Though he had always presented himself as a simple old man with chest pains, Jackson now recognized the shrewd intelligence in his eyes. This was no ordinary patient, but one of Standing Arrow's scouts. "The railroad men build a camp at the White Doctor's ranch," Swift Hawk reported. "Many men with guns. They prepare for the soldiers' arrival tomorrow." "Staging the scene," Jackson muttered. "Hayes will want everything to support his narrative when the military arrives." "Then we must disrupt his plans," Thunderstone declared. "Attack tonight. Drive them off before the soldiers come." Standing Arrow shook his head. "That would only strengthen their claims against us. We must be smarter than our enemies." The council debated various strategies as the afternoon wore on. Jackson listened carefully, offering insights about Hayes's tactics and military protocols when relevant. Despite his exhaustion and pain, he felt oddly energized. After years of isolation, applying his mind to a complex problem alongside others gave him a sense of purpose he had nearly forgotten. As dusk approached, the council reached a decision. Jackson, Thunderstone, and 8 warriors would ride to the ranch at first light, arriving before the military detachment. They would bring the legal land documents and evidence of the railroad's aggression. Jackson would present himself as a willing ally of the Navajo, not a captive, and would formally accuse Hayes of orchestrating the attack on his property. It was a dangerous plan, relying heavily on the territorial government's respect for legal ownership and Jackson's credibility as a white doctor. If it failed, they could all be arrested, or worse. As the council dispersed, Jackson found himself alone with Standing Arrow. The elderly chief studied him with those penetrating eyes that seemed to weigh not just his words but the substance of his character. "There is something I must ask you, Dr. Reed," Standing Arrow said finally. "Something that has troubled me since learning of your presence at Whispering Mesa." "Ask," Jackson replied simply. "Why did you help those people? You were a military surgeon sworn to follow orders. What made you risk your career? Perhaps your life for strangers you had been taught to see as enemies." It was a profound question, one that cut to the heart of choices Jackson had made long ago. He considered his answer carefully. "I became a doctor to save lives," he said slowly. "All lives. When I joined the army, I told myself I was still fulfilling that purpose, even in war. But Whispering Mesa..." He shook his head, the memories still vivid. "It wasn't war. It was murder. I couldn't be part of that, and still call myself a healer." Standing Arrow nodded, seemingly satisfied. "One more question, if I may. After leaving the army, you could have gone anywhere. Why choose such an isolated existence? Why turn away from your own people?" This question struck even deeper. "When I lost my family," Jackson said, his voice rougher. "I lost my center. I couldn't bear to be around others' happiness, their intact families. The isolation wasn't a punishment exactly. It was all I could manage. Yet you continued to offer healing to anyone who came to you." It was the one thing I still knew how to do, Jackson admitted. The chief's expression softened slightly. My people have a saying, the wounded healer carries the strongest medicine. Your pain has shaped you, Dr. Reed, but it has not defined you. Remember that in the days ahead. With those words, Standing Arrow left him to his thoughts. Jackson remained by the council fire as night fell, pondering the elderly chief's wisdom and the extraordinary turn his life had taken. Later, as Najoni checked his bandages in the quiet of the Hogan, Jackson broke their companionable silence. "You're Standing Arrow's granddaughter." She nodded, applying fresh herbal paste to his chest wounds. "My mother was his youngest daughter. She died of the white man's sickness when I was young." "I'm sorry," Jackson said, the inadequate words becoming all too familiar between them. "You lost your family as well," she observed. "Swift Hawk told us after his visits to your ranch." Jackson wasn't surprised that his casual patient had been gathering information all along. 5 years ago, fever took my wife and daughter within days of each other. Najoni's hands paused momentarily in their work. Children should not die before their parents. It is not the natural order of things. "No," Jackson agreed, the old grief a dull ache beneath his newer wounds. "It isn't." A moment of shared understanding passed between them. Two healers who had failed to save the ones they loved most. In that unspoken recognition, some of the remaining tension between them dissipated. "Your medicines," Jackson said, gesturing to the herbal paste she was applying. "I've never seen anything work so effectively against infection. Would you be willing to teach me how it's prepared?" Najoni seemed surprised by the request. "These are sacred formulations passed down through generations of our healers." "I understand," Jackson said. "I wouldn't want to violate your traditions. I just thought 2 healing traditions might be stronger than one." She studied him thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but such knowledge must be earned, not simply given." "How does one earn it?" A faint smile touched her lips, the first he had seen from her. "By proving himself trustworthy to begin with." She finished wrapping his bandage. "Rest now. Tomorrow will test us all." As she left, Jackson settled back on his bedding, his mind cycling through the events of the past days and the confrontation to come. Hayes's involvement changed everything. The man was not just a railroad representative, but someone with a personal stake in destroying Standing Arrow's people. Someone who had already demonstrated his willingness to spill innocent blood. Sleep came fitfully punctuated by dreams of Whispering Mesa, of his wife and daughter, calling for him as fever consumed them, of mountain lions with human eyes stalking him through desert canyons. Each time he woke, the soft sounds of the Navajo village surrounded him. Quiet conversations, a child's laughter, the distant singing of a night ceremony. Slowly, these peaceful sounds would lull him back to sleep, only for the nightmares to begin again. Shortly before dawn, Jackson woke to find Thunderstone standing in the entrance of the Hogan. The warrior's face was painted with red ochre streaks, traditional preparation for potential battle. "It is time," he said simply. Jackson rose, finding his wounds less painful than the previous day. As he gathered his things, Thunderstone watched him with barely concealed suspicion. "I know you do not trust me," Jackson said, meeting the warrior's gaze, "and you have every reason not to." "I saw you at Whispering Mesa," Thunderstone replied, "among the soldiers." "Yes, you wore their uniform, stood with them." "I did." Thunderstone's jaw tightened. "Yet Standing Arrow believes you tried to help our people that day." "I did," Jackson confirmed. "Though not enough and not soon enough." The warrior was silent for a long moment. "My first wife died there. My brother, 28 of our people." "I know," Jackson said quietly. "Nothing I say can change that. Nothing I do can bring them back." "No," Thunderstone agreed. "But what you do today may prevent more deaths." He straightened his decision made. "For now that is enough. Come. The others are waiting." Jackson followed Thunderstone from the Hogan, stepping into the cool pre-dawn air. His body ached less today, the combination of Navajo medicine and his own determination working to accelerate his healing. He moved with more confidence, his hand no longer automatically reaching to support his injured side. Whatever lay ahead, he would meet it, standing tall. The village was alive with quiet activity despite the early hour. Women prepared food for the warrior's journey. Children, normally playful, stood solemnly beside their mothers, sensing the gravity of the moment. Elders gathered near the council fire, voices low as they discussed strategies and contingencies. Outside, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, painting the cliffs in shades of lavender and rose. 8 mounted warriors waited in formation, their faces stoic beneath ceremonial paint. Standing Arrow stood before them, his silver hair catching the first hints of dawn. Nijoni moved among the riders, distributing small pouches of medicine to each warrior, murmuring instructions and blessings. When she reached Jackson, she handed him a larger bundle. "For your wounds, and for any who may need healing today." "Thank you," he said, securing the package to his saddle. Standing Arrow approached, carrying the leather document case containing the vital land patents. "Remember," he told Jackson, "Hayes will try to provoke violence to justify military action. Do not give him what he seeks." "I understand." Jackson nodded, accepting the case. The chief placed a hand on his shoulder. "Return safely, all of you. Our prayers go with you." With Thunderstone leading, the small party rode out of the hidden valley just as the first rays of sunlight touched the mesa tops. They traveled swiftly but cautiously, using routes that avoided open terrain where they might be spotted from a distance. As they rode, Jackson's thoughts returned to Hayes and their shared past. The man he remembered had been calculating, ruthless in pursuit of his ambitions, and skilled at manipulating perceptions. If he now worked for the railroad interests with the authority of territorial militia, behind him he would be a formidable opponent. By mid-morning, they approached the ridge overlooking Jackson's ranch. Thunderstone signaled for a halt, and they dismounted to assess the situation from cover. The scene below had changed dramatically since their last visit. A large camp had been established around the ruins of Jackson's cabin and barn. At least 20 men moved about the area, some in railroad company uniforms, others clearly hired guns. A line of fresh graves had been dug, presumably to support the narrative that Navajo raiders had killed railroad employees. "They prepare their lies well," Thunderstone observed grimly. Jackson scanned the activity, looking for Hayes among the men below. "I don't see the captain." "He will come with the soldiers," Thunderstone predicted, to appear as the voice of authority. As they watched, a scout rode into the camp from the east, causing immediate activity. Orders were shouted. Men scrambled to positions. "The military approaches," Thunderstone said. "We must move quickly." They remounted and rode toward the ranch, no longer concealing their approach. Jackson rode slightly ahead, making it clear that he led the party voluntarily. As they neared the camp, rifles were raised in their direction. "Hold your fire," Jackson called out, his voice carrying across the distance. "I am Dr. Jackson Reed, owner of this property." Confusion spread among the railroad men. This clearly wasn't the scenario they had prepared for. The supposedly kidnapped or murdered doctor appearing voluntarily in the company of Navajo warriors. A well-dressed man, whom Jackson recognized as Porter, the railroad representative who had orchestrated the initial threats, stepped forward. "Dr. Reed," he said, his voice betraying his surprise, "we were told you had been taken captive or killed." "As you can see, I'm neither," Jackson replied, reining in his horse a safe distance from the rifles still pointed their way. "These men are my allies, not my captors, and I've come to file a formal complaint against the Horizon Rail Company for the destruction of my property and livestock." Porter's expression hardened. "You're clearly confused, Doctor, perhaps suffering from exposure or duress. These savages attacked your ranch, not our men." "That's a lie," Jackson stated flatly. "Your men shot me in the leg when I refused to sell my land, then returned to burn my home when I wasn't here to defend it." He rolled up his pant leg, revealing the bandaged bullet wound. "This was no Navajo arrow, Mr. Porter. It was a bullet from your man's gun." Uncertainty rippled through the railroad men. This wasn't proceeding according to their script. Thunderstone moved his horse alongside Jackson's. "The military approaches from the east," he said quietly. "Perhaps a dozen riders." Jackson nodded his understanding, then addressed Porter again. "I suggest you lower your weapons. When the territorial authorities arrive, I want it clear who is threatening whom." Porter hesitated, then gave a reluctant signal. His men lowered their rifles, though they remained alert and ready. The sound of approaching horsemen grew louder. Around the eastern bend in the trail came a detachment of 12 mounted soldiers, their uniforms dusty from travel, but their discipline evident in their formation. At their head rode a man Jackson instantly recognized, despite the years that had passed. Captain William Hayes had aged well, his formerly brown hair now streaked with distinguished gray at the temples, his posture military straight in the saddle. The captain's bars on his shoulders gleamed in the sunlight. A promotion, since Jackson had known him as a lieutenant. His eyes, cold and calculating, as ever widened slightly at the unexpected tableau before him. "Dr. Reed," Hayes said, recovering quickly from his surprise, "you appear to be alive and well. The reports we received suggested otherwise." "The reports were fabricated," Jackson replied evenly, "by men who wanted me out of the way so they could steal legally owned land." Hayes turned to Porter with a convincing display of confusion. "Mr. Porter, you claimed the doctor had been kidnapped or killed by Navajo raiders." Porter shifted uncomfortably. "That was our understanding based on the evidence we found." "Evidence you manufactured," Jackson interjected. He addressed Hayes directly. "Captain, I was attacked by Mr. Porter's men 3 days ago, shot in the leg for refusing to sell my property. Later they returned and destroyed my home, killed most of my livestock, and burned my medical research. My Navajo neighbors came to my aid, not to harm me." Hayes studied Jackson, his expression unreadable. "That's a serious accusation, Doctor. Why would the railroad resort to such tactics? Because my land stands between them and a copper deposit they've discovered on Navajo territory," Jackson said, watching Hayes carefully for reaction. "Territory that is legally owned by Chief Standing Arrow's people under territorial government patents." A flicker of surprise, genuine this time, crossed Hayes's face. Clearly, he hadn't known about the legal land patents. "Chief Standing Arrow," Hayes repeated, recognition dawning in his eyes. "From the Whispering Mesa incident." "The Whispering Mesa massacre," Jackson corrected deliberately, using the charged word. "Yes, the very same." Thunderstone stiffened beside him, but maintained his composure as they had agreed. This confrontation would be won with words and law, not weapons. Hayes turned to his soldiers. "Secure the area. I want to speak with Dr. Reed privately." To Jackson, he said, "If you would dismount and join me, Doctor, I'd like to hear your version of events in detail." It was a critical moment. Refusing would make Jackson appear uncooperative. Accepting might separate him from his Navajo allies. After a brief hesitation, he dismounted, signaling Thunderstone to remain vigilant. "I'll speak with you, Captain," Jackson said. "But I want one of Chief Standing Arrow's men present as witness." Hayes smiled thinly. "Of course. I have nothing to hide." Thunderstone dismounted and joined Jackson. Hayes led them to a makeshift table set up near the ruins of Jackson's cabin. Porter followed, visibly nervous about this unexpected turn of events. As they settled, Hayes studied Jackson with clinical detachment. "You've changed, Reed. The war surgeon I knew wouldn't have allied himself with Indians against his own kind. And the lieutenant I knew was ambitious, but not a mass murderer," Jackson countered. "Times change us all." Hayes's smile never reached his eyes. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries. What exactly do you want?" "Justice," Jackson answered simply. "Recognition of the legal boundaries established by territorial patents, compensation for my destroyed property, and an end to railroad encroachment on lands they don't own." Hayes leaned back, considering. "And if I were to offer you a generous settlement, say 10 times what Porter originally proposed for your land, you could start fresh elsewhere, leave all this unpleasantness behind." "This isn't about money," Jackson said. "It's about right and wrong, something I thought Army officers understood." "Right and wrong are luxuries, Doctor," Hayes replied, his voice hardening. "Progress is inevitable. The railroad will come through these territories, bringing civilization, commerce, opportunity. A few nomadic Indians and one stubborn doctor won't stop that." "They're not nomadic," Jackson corrected. "They have legal title to their land granted by the same government you claim to represent." Hayes glanced at Thunderstone, then back to Jackson. "I see they've filled your head with stories. Whatever documents they've shown you are likely forgeries. These people are skilled at deception." Jackson reached for the leather case, removing the land patents. "See for yourself, Captain. These bear the territorial governor's seal and signature, issued 15 years ago in recognition of service during the Apache campaigns." Hayes examined the documents with growing concern, unable to dismiss their authenticity. "Even if these are real," he said finally, "they don't change the larger reality. The railroad has the backing of powerful interests in Washington. One small legal obstacle won't deter them for long." "Perhaps," Jackson acknowledged, "but it will delay them long enough for me to take these documents and my testimony about your actions to the territorial capital. I wonder how your backers will feel when they learn their project is being managed by a man with a history of massacring innocent civilians and falsifying reports to cover it up." Hayes's expression darkened. "That's a dangerous path to walk, Reed. Accidents happen to men who travel alone with inflammatory accusations." "I won't be traveling alone," Jackson replied. "And copies of these documents, along with my sworn testimony about Whispering Mesa and recent events, have already been prepared. If anything happens to me or Standing Arrow's people, they'll find their way to the governor's office and several newspaper editors." It was a bluff. No such copies had been made, but Hayes had no way of knowing that. The captain's jaw tightened as he calculated his options. "You always were clever, Reed," he said finally. "Too clever for your own good. But you're making a mistake aligning yourself with these people. They'll use you until you're no longer useful, then discard you." "Like the railroad would?" Jackson asked pointedly. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the perimeter. A lone rider approached at a gallop, a Navajo youth whom Jackson recognized from the village. Thunderstone stepped forward to meet him, listening to his urgent message with growing alarm. He turned back to Jackson and Hayes. "Riders attack our village," he reported tersely. "Many men with guns. Our people fight, but they need help." Jackson stood immediately. "We have to go." Hayes's expression showed calculated interest. Fascinating timing, just as our negotiations reach a critical point. This isn't a negotiation, Jackson snapped, and I suspect you know exactly who's attacking the village. The captain spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. The railroad employs many contractors, Doctor. I can hardly keep track of all their activities. Jackson turned to Thunderstone. We need to ride immediately. As they moved toward their horses, Hayes called after them. This changes nothing, Reed. The railroad will have its route one way or another. They mounted quickly, the urgency of the situation overriding all other concerns. As they galloped away, Jackson glanced back at his ruined homestead at Hayes, watching their departure with cold calculation, at the soldiers who stood by, unwilling or unable to interfere in what they likely saw as a private corporate matter. The hidden valley was under attack. Everything they had feared was happening, perhaps orchestrated by Hayes as a diversion, while he dealt with Jackson and the land documents. The fate of Standing Arrow's people now hung in the balance, and with it any hope for justice against the railroad's encroachment. Jackson rode hard alongside Thunderstone and the warriors, his wounds protesting with every hoofbeat, his mind racing with possibilities and fears. Hayes had found the hidden valley somehow, perhaps by following their tracks, perhaps through information extracted from a captured Navajo. However he had done it, the sanctuary was no longer secret. The confrontation with Hayes had revealed the captain's surprise about the legal land patents. That was valuable information. Hayes had been operating under the assumption that the Navajo had no legal claim to their territory. Now that he knew otherwise, he would be even more dangerous, more determined to eliminate all obstacles to the railroad's plans. As they rode, Jackson could only hope they would arrive in time to prevent another massacre, and that the documents he carried would still matter when the dust settled. The sounds of gunfire echoed through the canyon as they approached the hidden entrance to the valley. Thunderstone led them through a narrow passage between towering rock walls, a route that bypassed the main entrance where the attack was apparently focused. Our warriors defend the main path, he explained as they rode, but if the attackers find this way in... He didn't need to finish the thought. If the raiders discovered this secondary entrance, they could outflank the defenders and pour into the village unimpeded. The passage widened suddenly, revealing the valley from its western edge. From this vantage point, Jackson could see the entire settlement and the battle unfolding at its eastern approach. At least 30 mounted attackers, railroad men by their appearance, were exchanging fire with Navajo defenders positioned among the rocks guarding the main entrance. So far, the valley's natural fortifications were holding, but the attackers had numbers and superior firepower on their side. "We must warn the village," Thunderstone said, "then join the defense." They rode hard toward the settlement. As they approached, Jackson saw that preparations for just such an attack had been underway since their departure that morning. Women and children were gathering essential supplies, the elderly were being moved to secure locations in the rock walls, and additional warriors were arming themselves to reinforce those at the entrance. Standing Arrow stood in the center of this organized chaos, directing his people with calm authority. When he saw Jackson and Thunderstone, relief briefly crossed his weathered features. "The railroad men found us," he said as they dismounted. "A scout was captured yesterday. They must have forced him to reveal our location." "Hayes was waiting for us at the ranch," Jackson reported quickly. "He knows about the land patents now. This attack is likely his response. Eliminate your people. Eliminate the legal claim." Standing Arrow nodded grimly. "We suspected as much when the attack began." He turned to Thunderstone. "Take your warriors to the eastern rocks. The attackers are trying to scale the northern wall as well." As Thunderstone departed with his men, Jackson turned back to Standing Arrow. "Let me help. There will be wounded. Najoni has prepared the healing lodge. the chief replied, pointing to a structure near the center of the village. Your skills will be needed there. Jackson hurried to the lodge, finding Najoni and Morning Sky already organizing supplies, bandages, herbal preparations, surgical tools. Several injured defenders had already been brought in their wounds, being tended by Navajo women under Najoni's direction. You returned, she said when she saw him, surprise and perhaps relief in her voice. Of course, Jackson replied, setting down his medical bag. Where do you need me? For the next hour, Jackson worked alongside Najoni, treating gunshot wounds and other injuries as the battle continued outside. The two healers developed a rhythm, each applying their knowledge in complement to the other. Where Jackson's surgical skills were needed, he took the lead. Where Navajo medicine offered better treatment for pain or preventing infection, Najoni applied her expertise. Between patients, Jackson asked, How long can your warriors hold them off? Not indefinitely, Najoni admitted. We have fewer guns, less ammunition. If they find another way in... A young boy rushed into the lodge. More wounded coming, and the white men have found the western path. Jackson and Najoni exchanged alarmed glances. The raiders had discovered the same hidden entrance they had used to return to the valley. The defenders were about to be caught between two forces. Take what you can, Jackson told Najoni, grabbing essential supplies. We need to move these patients to safety. Outside, the situation had deteriorated rapidly. Gunfire now came from both the eastern and western approaches. Warriors were repositioning to face the new threat, but they were being stretched too thin. Standing Arrow approached them, his expression grave. We must evacuate the Central Valley. There is a hidden cave system in the southern wall where our people can shelter. What about the wounded? Jackson asked. Move them first, the chief ordered. Then the children and elderly. Our warriors will cover the retreat. As they organized the evacuation, Jackson noticed Morning Sky standing alone, staring toward Turquoise Mountain with an odd intensity. Morning Sky, he called to her. We need to move to the caves. The elderly woman turned to him slowly. The mountain weeps, she said, her voice distant. It knows what comes. Jackson gently took her arm, guiding her toward the evacuation route. We'll protect the mountain, he assured her, though he had no idea how they could make such a promise. As they moved, the wounded Jackson caught glimpses of the battle. The defenders were fighting valiantly, making the raiders pay for every inch of ground they gained. But it was clear they were outnumbered and outgunned. Without reinforcements or some dramatic change in circumstances, the valley would eventually fall. Once the wounded were safely established in the cave system, a remarkably extensive network of natural chambers that could easily shelter the entire community, Jackson sought out Standing Arrow. We need to get word to the territorial authorities, he said. Hayes is operating without official sanction. If the governor knew what was happening here, we have sent riders, Standing Arrow replied, but the territorial capital is 3 days' journey. By then, much will be decided. The chief's calm in the face of disaster impressed Jackson. Here was a man watching his people's sanctuary being invaded, yet he maintained the steady leadership they needed. What can I do? Jackson asked simply. Standing Arrow regarded him thoughtfully. You hold our land patents, the proof of our legal right to this valley. If our defense fails, those documents must reach the territorial governor. You're asking me to leave, Jackson realized. I am asking you to continue our fight in the white man's courts if we cannot win it here with weapons, the chief clarified. There is a path south through the caves that emerges beyond the raiders' lines. A swift rider could depart undetected. Jackson felt torn. His medical skills were needed here, yet the documents he carried might be the community's last hope for justice. Before he could respond, Nijoni approached with urgent news. The raiders have breached the western defense. They're moving toward the Central Valley. Standing Arrow's expression remained steady, though his eyes reflected the gravity of the situation. How many? At least 15 men well armed, she reported. Thunderstone and his warriors are engaging them, but they're outnumbered. The chief made his decision quickly. Dr. Reed will take the land patents south through the caves. Nijoni, you will guide him. She looked startled. Grandfather, my place is here with the wounded. Morning Sky can oversee their care, Standing Arrow countered. Your knowledge of the southern paths is needed. And, he hesitated briefly, if our defense fails, you must survive to lead our people. The implication was clear. Standing Arrow was preparing for the worst, ensuring that his granddaughter and the vital documents would survive even if the valley fell. Jackson felt the weight of the responsibility being placed on him. I'll deliver the documents to the governor myself, he promised. And I'll make sure Hayes answers for his actions. The chief clasped his arm in a gesture of trust. May the spirits guide your path, Dr. Reed. Now go quickly. As Jackson and Nijoni gathered supplies for their journey, the sounds of battle grew closer. The raiders had pushed past the outer defenses and were moving steadily toward the caves. Hurry! Standing Arrow urged, pressing a water skin into Jackson's hands. Thunderstone cannot hold them back much longer. A thunderous crack echoed through the cave as a rifle volley split the air outside, followed by shouts and the pounding of boots on stone. Women clutched children to their chests, trying to quiet their frightened cries. Elders murmured prayers in Navajo, their faces solemn in the dim firelight. It's time, Nijoni said, securing a small pack to her back and gripping Jackson's arm. Are you ready? Jackson nodded, casting one last glance at the cave entrance where defenders were piling rocks to barricade the way. He caught Morning Sky's eye across the chamber, and the elderly woman gave him a knowing nod, as if she had already seen this moment in her visions. Lead on, he told Nijoni, grasping the leather case containing the precious documents more tightly against his chest. This way, Nijoni directed, leading Jackson deeper into the cave network. The passage narrowed, requiring them to proceed single file, guided only by the small torch she carried. Behind them, the echoing gunfire and shouts told of the defenders' desperate stand at the cave entrance. Jackson thought of Thunderstone, Standing Arrow, Morning Sky, people who had become allies and perhaps friends in the span of just a few days. People who were now fighting for their survival while he escaped with their most precious legal protection. They're buying us time, Nijoni said, as if reading his thoughts. We must make it count. They pushed on through the darkness, the sounds of battle gradually fading behind them. The path twisted and descended, passing through chambers adorned with ancient Navajo pictographs, crossing underground streams, and navigating narrow squeezes that barely allowed passage. After what seemed like hours, they emerged into a small canyon far south of the valley. The afternoon sun was blinding after the darkness of the caves. They blinked, adjusting to the light, listening carefully for any signs of pursuit. We need horses, Jackson said, surveying their surroundings. There's a small grazing area this way, Nijoni replied. Our people keep mounts there for emergencies. Sure enough, a short distance away, they found several horses concealed in a hidden meadow with access to water. They quickly selected two of the strongest animals and prepared to ride. As they mounted, Jackson looked north toward the hidden valley now concealed behind rocky ridges. Smoke rose in the distance, the only visible sign of the battle still raging. Do you think they can hold out? He asked Nijoni. She gazed at the smoke, her expression a mixture of worry and determination. My grandfather is wise. He will find a way to protect our people. After a pause, she added, but our safety now depends on reaching the governor before Hayes can spin his lies. Jackson nodded, the leather case containing the land patents secure inside his shirt. Then we ride hard. The territorial capital is what? 3 days south. If we push the horses, perhaps 2, she replied. But we'll need to be careful. Hayes will have men watching the roads. Then we avoid roads, Jackson decided. You know this country. Lead the way. As they urged their mounts forward, beginning the long journey south, Jackson felt the full weight of their mission. The fate of Standing Arrow's people, the future of the Hidden Valley, and justice for both past and present crimes now rested on their ability to reach the territorial authorities with evidence intact. Behind them, gunfire continued to echo from the Hidden Valley. Whether they would ever see it, or its people, again remained to be seen. They rode hard through the remainder of the day, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the conflict. The terrain gradually shifted from rocky canyons to open desert, offering less cover but faster travel. Neither spoke much, conserving their strength and focus for the journey ahead. Only when the horses began to falter did they pause briefly to rest and water the animals at a small seep Najoni knew of. By late afternoon, the distant smoke from the valley was no longer visible, but its memory drove them onward. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they pushed deeper into the vast emptiness of the New Mexico territory. The desert night enveloped Jackson and Najoni as they pushed their horses southward. Stars crowded the vast New Mexico sky, offering just enough light to navigate the rugged terrain. They had been riding for hours, following game trails and dry creek beds rather than established roads, stopping only when necessary to rest the animals. Jackson's wounds throbbed with every movement of his mount, but he kept pace with Najoni, who rode with the confident grace of someone born to this harsh landscape. The leather document case pressed against his chest, a constant reminder of their mission and what was at stake. We should make camp soon, Najoni said, reining in her horse beside a small outcropping of rocks. The horses need rest, and so do you. Jackson wanted to protest that they should continue, that every minute counted, but he knew she was right. They had perhaps a 2-day journey ahead, and exhausting themselves or their mounts would only delay their arrival. They dismounted in the shelter of the rock formation. Najoni quickly gathered scrub brush for a small fire, which she built in a depression where its light would be shielded from distant observers. No more than an hour, Jackson said, easing himself down beside the tiny flames. Then we should continue. Najoni nodded, her expression unreadable in the flickering light. She reached into her pack and removed dried meat and a small pouch of parched corn, offering some to Jackson. They ate in silence for a few minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Jackson spoke. Do you think they're still holding out, your people in the valley? Najoni stared into the fire. My grandfather is a wise leader. He will find a way to protect as many as possible. She looked up at Jackson. But they are fighting for their home, their sacred places. They will not surrender easily. Hayes won't stop until he gets what he wants, Jackson said grimly. He's a man who covers one crime with another, each more desperate than the last. Like you were at Whispering Mesa. The question came suddenly, catching Jackson off guard. He met her gaze. I wasn't the one giving orders that day. But you were there, in a uniform, part of it. Yes, Jackson admitted. I was part of it, until I wasn't. Najoni studied him, her eyes reflecting the small flames. Thunderstone told me what you did, hiding survivors, helping them escape. Too little, too late, Jackson said, the old guilt heavy in his voice. I should have acted sooner. Should have seen what Hayes was planning before we reached that valley. Why didn't you? It was a simple question, but it cut to the heart of what had haunted Jackson for years. Because I believed in orders, he said slowly. In the chain of command. In the idea that those above me had information I didn't, justification I couldn't see. He shook his head. It's a comfortable lie soldiers tell themselves, that they're just following orders, not responsible for the consequences. And now, Najoni asked. Now I know better, Jackson replied. Every man chooses what he will or won't do, what he can live with afterward. Najoni seemed to accept this answer. After a moment she said, My husband believed that too, that we all choose our path. She rarely spoke of her lost family, and Jackson remained silent, letting her continue if she wished. He was a peaceful man, a healer like me. But when the soldiers came to our hunting camp, he stood between them and our son. Her voice remained steady, but Jackson could hear the grief beneath it. They shot him first, then my boy. Jackson closed his eyes briefly. I'm sorry, Najoni. Truly. I don't tell you this for your sympathy, she said. I tell you so you understand why this valley, these people matter so much. They are all I have left, all any of us have left. I understand, Jackson said quietly. More than you might think. They fell silent again, the small fire crackling between them. After a few minutes, Jackson asked, Tell me about Turquoise Mountain. Why is it sacred to your people? The question seemed to surprise her, but she answered readily. It has been a holy place for many generations. Our ancestors believed the mountain connects our world to the spirit world. The blue stones are tears of the spirits shed for the suffering of the living. She gestured towards the north, where the mountain lay hidden beyond the horizon. But it is more than beliefs. The mountain's waters feed our streams, nurture plants that heal sickness. It is life itself to us. And the copper beneath it would poison those waters, Jackson observed. Najoni nodded. The mining would tear open the mountain's heart, spill its blood into our sacred places. Nothing would grow, nothing would heal. Jackson understood now why Standing Arrow's people fought so desperately to protect their land. It wasn't just territory to them, but the source of their physical and spiritual sustenance. We should move on, he said, checking his pocket watch. We've rested long enough. They extinguished the fire and remounted, continuing their journey through the night. As they rode, Jackson found himself thinking about the different kinds of medicine he had encountered in his life. Western science, with its precision and empirical approach. Native healing, with its holistic understanding of body, spirit, and environment. Perhaps both were incomplete without the other, each seeing only part of the whole. The thought stayed with him as they traveled under the vast canopy of stars, two healers from different worlds united by a common cause. Dawn found them crossing a wide plateau, the first rays of sunlight painting the landscape in hues of gold and crimson. They had made good progress through the night, but both riders and horses were showing signs of fatigue. There's a trading post about 2 hours south, Najoni said, pointing toward distant hills. We can rest there, perhaps exchange these horses for fresh ones. Jackson nodded his agreement. Will it be safe? Hayes might have men watching such places. The trader is Navajo mixed with Mexican. He has no love for railroad men or the military. We can trust him. They pressed on the morning heat building as the sun climbed higher. Jackson's wounds had begun to seep through their bandages, the exertion of hard riding reopening partially healed tissue. He said nothing, knowing that their mission took precedence over his discomfort. By mid-morning they approached the trading post, a modest adobe structure with attached corrals nestled against a hillside. Several horses and mules were visible in the enclosures, and smoke rose from the chimney. "Wait here," Najoni instructed, reining in her horse 100 yards from the building. "Let me scout first." Jackson watched as she rode forward alone, approaching the trading post with cautious alertness. She dismounted and disappeared inside for several minutes before emerging with an older man. After a brief conversation, she waved Jackson forward. The trader was a weathered individual of mixed heritage, his dark eyes shrewd but not unfriendly. He introduced himself simply as Miguel. "Najoni tells me you ride to the territorial capital on urgent business," he said, eyeing Jackson's bandaged condition with professional interest. "And that you have enemies who would stop you." "That's correct," Jackson confirmed, dismounting stiffly. Miguel nodded thoughtfully. "2 riders passed through yesterday, asking about a white doctor traveling with a Navajo woman. They wore railroad company badges, but carried guns like hired killers." Jackson and Najoni exchanged concerned glances. Hayes had anticipated their move and sent men to intercept them. "Did you tell them anything?" Jackson asked. Miguel smiled thinly. "I told them I had seen no such travelers, but they left a man watching the road south." He gestured toward a distant ridge. "He is there now, thinking himself hidden." "We need to avoid him," Najoni said. "There is another way," Miguel offered. "A canyon trail my grandfather used to avoid Apache patrols. It adds half a day to your journey, but bypasses the watched roads entirely." While Najoni discussed the route with Miguel, Jackson took the opportunity to check his wounds. As he suspected, the chest lacerations had reopened, seeping blood through the bandages. The bullet wound in his leg was inflamed, but holding. Miguel noticed his condition. "You need attention, doctor. My wife can help." Before Jackson could respond, a small, energetic woman emerged from the trading post carrying a basket of medical supplies. She introduced herself as Elena and immediately began examining Jackson's injuries with practiced hands. "These need cleaning and fresh dressing," she declared. "Come inside while Miguel prepares fresh horses for you." In the cool interior of the adobe building, Elena efficiently rebandaged Jackson's wounds, applying a salve that smelled of desert herbs and beeswax. "This will help with infection," she explained. "An old Apache recipe." "Thank you," Jackson said sincerely. "Your husband mentioned railroad men looking for us. Have there been others through here? Military, perhaps?" Elena nodded as she worked. "A patrol passed 2 days ago heading north. The officer in charge was asking questions about Navajo movements." "Captain Hayes?" Jackson asked. "I did not hear a name," Elena replied. "But the men with him seemed afraid of him. That tells much about a leader." Once Jackson's wounds were properly dressed, they returned outside to find Najoni and Miguel with 4 fresh horses, 2 to ride and 2 as remounts for when the first pair tired. "I've packed food and water," Miguel said, securing saddlebags to one of the animals, "and drawn a map of the canyon trail." He handed Najoni a folded piece of leather with charcoal markings. "Follow it exactly. There are places where it seems the path ends, but it continues if you know where to look." "We can't pay you properly for all this," Jackson began, but Miguel waved away his concern. "Najoni's grandmother once saved my son's life," he said simply. "Besides, I have no love for the railroad men. They threaten traders like me as much as they do the Navajo." As they prepared to depart, Elena approached with a small package wrapped in deerskin. "Medicine," she told Jackson, "for your journey. And this," she handed him a folded piece of paper. "A message that came last night by Ryder. He said to give it to any Navajo heading south." Jackson unfolded the paper, finding a brief message written in a neat, educated hand. "To whom it may concern, Fort Wilson, troops have been mobilized north at Hayes's request. Claims of Navajo uprising, governor unaware. Seek Judge Morris at territorial capital. He can intervene. A friend. Jackson showed the note to Nijoni. Someone in the territorial government knows what Hayes is doing and doesn't approve. Can we trust this? She asked skeptically. Judge Morris has a reputation for fairness in Indian affairs, Jackson replied. It's worth the risk to approach him directly, rather than trying to navigate territorial bureaucracy. With the mysterious message tucked safely away, and fresh horses beneath them, they bid farewell to Miguel and Elena. Following the trader's directions, they headed not south down the main trail, where the watcher waited, but east toward a narrow canyon entrance barely visible among the rocky hills. If we push these horses, Jackson said as they rode, how soon could we reach the capital? By tomorrow evening, Nijoni replied, but we must be cautious. If Hayes has men searching for us, they will watch all approaches to the city. Jackson nodded his understanding. The leather case containing the land patents felt heavy against his chest, a physical reminder of the responsibility they carried. 2 days had passed since they left the hidden valley. What had happened there in their absence? Were Standing Arrow and his people still holding out against the raiders, or had Hayes already achieved his goals, eliminating witnesses and clearing the path for the railroad's expansion? Such questions haunted Jackson as they pushed deeper into the twisting canyon, following Miguel's hand-drawn map through a maze of stone that would, if they were fortunate, deliver them unseen to the territorial capital. The canyon trail proved even more difficult than Miguel had suggested. In places, it narrowed to barely the width of a horse, forcing them to dismount and lead the animals through treacherous passages. Twice they had to backtrack when apparent dead ends concealed the true path. By nightfall, they had made less progress than hoped. They made camp in a small box canyon with access to water, both riders and horses exhausted from the day's journey. As Nijoni prepared a cold meal, they dared not risk a fire. Jackson studied the mysterious note again. What troubles you about it? Nijoni asked, noticing his concentration. Not troubles exactly, Jackson replied. I'm wondering who our anonymous friend might be. Someone with access to military information but opposed to Hayes's actions. Perhaps another officer with a conscience, Nijoni suggested. Like you had at Whispering Mesa. Jackson shook his head. More likely someone in the territorial administration who recognizes that Hayes is exceeding his authority. He folded the note carefully. Whoever they are, I'm grateful for the warning about Fort Wilson's troops. If we had encountered a military patrol, he didn't need to finish the thought. A patrol would have detained them at minimum, possibly arrested them on Hayes's orders. Their mission would have failed before they reached the capital. As they settled for the night, taking turns standing watch, Jackson found sleep elusive, despite his exhaustion. His thoughts kept returning to the hidden valley and its people. In just a few days, they had become more than allies of convenience to him. They were people he respected, even cared about. Standing Arrow's wisdom, Morning Sky's insights, Thunderstone's fierce loyalty, and Nijoni's strength and knowledge that had quite literally saved his life. When he finally drifted into uneasy sleep, his dreams were a confused mixture of past and present, the chaotic horror of Whispering Mesa blending with the attack on the hidden valley, the faces of his lost wife and daughter merging with those of Nijoni and Morning Sky. He woke before dawn, sweat-soaked, despite the cool night air, to find Nijoni watching him with concern. "You called out in your sleep," she said quietly. "Names I did not recognize." "Elizabeth, Sarah," Jackson explained, his voice rough. "My wife and daughter." Nijoni nodded, understanding. "The spirits of those we've lost walk with us in dreams." These weren't comforting visitations, Jackson admitted, sitting up and rubbing his face. More like reminders of failure. My people believe that dreams that disturb us are often messages we need to hear, Najoni said. What do you think yours was telling you? Jackson considered the question seriously. That I failed my family when they needed me most. That I might fail your people the same way. Najoni's expression softened slightly. My grandmother would say that knowing our fears gives us power over them. After a pause, she added, We should move on. We have many miles to cover before nightfall. They continued their journey as the first light of dawn filtered into the canyon. The trail gradually widened, allowing them to make better time. By mid-afternoon, they emerged from the canyon system onto a broad plain. In the distance, perhaps 20 miles south, they could see the faint outlines of buildings, the territorial capital. We'll reach it by nightfall, Najoni observed, shielding her eyes against the sun. We should approach separately, Jackson decided. I'll enter the city openly, seek out Judge Morris. You'll be safer waiting outside the city limits. Najoni frowned. I did not come all this way to hide while you face dangers alone. It's not about hiding, Jackson explained patiently. A Navajo woman would be noticed in the capital, possibly detained for questioning. If I'm captured or stopped, you'll still be free to make another attempt with the documents. She didn't like it, but she recognized the logic. Where will you find this judge? The territorial court building, most likely, Jackson replied, or his residence, if court isn't in session. And if Hayes has men watching for you, then I'll have to be cautious, he acknowledged. But a single white man attracts less attention than a white man traveling with a Navajo woman. They rode steadily through the afternoon, switching to their remount horses to maintain their pace. As twilight approached and the city grew closer, they stopped to finalize their plan. I'll enter after dark, Jackson said. Less chance of being recognized that way. You wait here until morning. If I haven't returned by noon tomorrow, take the documents and find another way to reach Judge Morris. Najoni nodded reluctantly. How will you explain your wounds if questioned? I'm a doctor, Jackson replied with a grim smile. I'll say I was treating an injured miner who accidentally shot me. People rarely question medical professionals about such things. As darkness fell, they found a sheltered area where Najoni could wait safely, hidden from casual observation, but with a clear view of the road approaching from the city. Jackson transferred the precious land patents to a less conspicuous leather folder that might pass for ordinary business documents. Before departing, he turned to Najoni. Thank you, he said simply, for everything. The healing, the guidance, for trusting me when you had every reason not to. I still don't fully trust you, she replied, though her tone lacked its earlier hostility. But I believe you will try to help my people. That is enough for now. With a nod of acknowledgement, Jackson mounted his horse and rode toward the territorial capital, a lone figure silhouetted briefly against the twilight sky before disappearing into the gathering darkness. The territorial capital was a curious mixture of Spanish colonial architecture, Native American influence, and newer American construction, a physical representation of the region's complex history and contested present. Despite the late hour, several saloons and gambling establishments remained active along the main street, their light and noise spilling out into the otherwise quiet town. Jackson kept to the shadows, moving with purpose, but avoiding obvious haste that might draw attention. His destination was the territorial courthouse, a substantial adobe structure at the center of town. From there, he hoped to learn Judge Morris's residence. As he approached the courthouse, Jackson noticed two men lounging near its entrance, casual in posture, but alert in their gaze, scanning everyone who passed. Railroad men almost certainly positioned to watch for exactly someone like him. Changing direction, Jackson headed instead toward a modest hotel across the street. Inside, he approached the desk clerk, a bored-looking young man reading a dime novel. "Evening," Jackson greeted him pleasantly. "I'm looking for Judge Morris's residence. I have legal documents that need his immediate attention." The clerk barely looked up. "Judge lives on Hill Street, big house with the white columns, but he ain't there. Left for Santa Fe this morning, won't be back for a week." Jackson felt a sinking sensation. Their primary contact was unavailable. Is there another judge who could help with an urgent territorial matter, land dispute requiring immediate attention? Now the clerk did look up, studying Jackson with more interest. "You a lawyer?" "Doctor," Jackson replied, "but I represent clients with a pressing legal concern." The clerk shrugged. "Only other judicial authority in town right now is Justice Palmer. He handles minor cases when Morris is away. Lives above the Mercantile on 2nd Street. "Thank you," Jackson said, placing a coin on the counter. As he turned to leave, he added casually, "By the way, I noticed some men watching the courthouse. Any trouble in town lately?" "Railroad company men," the clerk replied, pocketing the coin. "Been here 2 days asking questions about strangers coming to town. Word is they're looking for a doctor who caused some trouble up north." So Hayes had indeed sent men ahead to intercept him. Jackson nodded as if merely curious about local gossip. "Interesting. Thank you for the warning." Outside, Jackson kept to the darker side streets, making his way toward the Mercantile. Justice Palmer wasn't Judge Morris, but he might still have the authority to issue emergency orders protecting Standing Arrow's land rights until a formal hearing could be arranged. The Mercantile was closed for the night, but a light shone from the second-floor windows. Jackson found the external stairs leading to the upper residence and climbed them quietly. He knocked on the door, aware that every moment in the open increased his risk of discovery. After a long pause, the door opened to reveal an elderly man with spectacles and thinning white hair, dressed in a nightshirt and robe. "Yes. What is it?" he asked irritably. "Justice Palmer. I apologize for the late hour, but I have an urgent legal matter requiring immediate judicial attention." The old man squinted at him suspiciously. "Who are you?" "Dr. Jackson Reed. I represent a Navajo community with legal land titles under threat from railroad interests. There's an armed confrontation underway that only territorial authority can resolve." Palmer's expression shifted from irritation to discomfort. "Indian affairs are outside my jurisdiction, especially when railroad interests are involved. You need to speak with Judge Morris." "I understand he's in Santa Fe," Jackson said. "But this matter can't wait a week. Lives are at stake." "I'm sorry, Doctor, but my hands are tied," Palmer insisted. "Even if I were inclined to involve myself, which I'm not, I lack the authority to intervene in such a dispute." Jackson sensed that further argument would be useless. Palmer was either genuinely constrained by jurisdictional limitations or simply unwilling to challenge powerful railroad interests. "Is there anyone else who might help someone in the territorial administration?" he asked, hoping for any alternative. Palmer hesitated, then said in a lower voice, "Try the Indian Affairs Office. Thomas Blackwood, the deputy administrator. He's had disagreements with the railroad company in the past. His office is in the government building, but at this hour you'll find him at the Territorial Hotel." "Thank you," Jackson said, recognizing the reluctant but valuable assistance. "I didn't tell you anything," Palmer replied, already closing his door. "And, Doctor, be careful. The railroad doesn't appreciate interference in its business." Jackson made his way to the Territorial Hotel, a more elegant establishment, catering to government officials and wealthy travelers. The clerk at this hotel was considerably more attentive than the previous one. "Mr. Blackwood." "Yes, he's staying with us. Shall I send up a message?" "Please," Jackson replied. Tell him Dr. Jackson Reed is here regarding urgent Indian affairs business. I'll wait in the lobby." The clerk dispatched a boy with the message, and Jackson took a seat in a corner of the lobby, where he could watch both the stairs and the entrance. Minutes passed with excruciating slowness, each one increasing the risk that Hayes's men might spot him. Finally, a man descended the stairs, tall, middle-aged, with a carefully trimmed beard and the bearing of a career government official. He scanned the lobby, located Jackson, and approached with measured steps. "Dr. Reed," he inquired quietly. "I'm Thomas Blackwood. What's this about urgent Indian affairs business?" Jackson stood, keeping his voice low. "Is there somewhere more private we could speak? What I have to say involves matters of life and death, and there are men in town looking for me." Blackwood studied him for a moment, noting Jackson's disheveled appearance and the evidence of bandages beneath his shirt. "My room," he decided. "Follow me, but not too closely." In Blackwood's hotel room, Jackson finally felt secure enough to reveal the full story. The attack on his ranch, the hidden Navajo Valley Hayes's involvement, the land patents, and the ongoing conflict that might already have resulted in another massacre. Blackwood listened without interruption, his expression growing graver as Jackson's account unfolded. When Jackson produced the land patents from their hidden folder, the official examined them with expert attention. "These appear genuine," he confirmed. "Unusual, but legally binding. The territorial government rarely granted such titles to native communities, but these have all the required signatures and seals." "Then you can help," Jackson asked. "Issue orders to stop Hayes and protect Standing Arrow's people." Blackwood sighed heavily. "It's not that simple, Doctor. I lack direct authority to countermand military actions or railroad operations. However," he paused, thinking, "I can send an official wire to the governor in Santa Fe requesting immediate intervention, and I can dispatch territorial marshals to investigate the situation. How quickly can they reach the hidden valley?" "2 days at minimum," Blackwood replied. "But I can send a priority telegraph to Fort Wilson tonight, ordering them to recall any troops deployed against Navajo settlements pending investigation of the land claims." It wasn't everything Jackson had hoped for, but it was a start. "Do it, please. Every hour matters." As Blackwood prepared to leave for the telegraph office, he gave Jackson a searching look. "You know the anonymous message warning you about Hayes and suggesting Judge Morris. That came from me." Jackson's suspicions were confirmed. "You're our friend in the territorial administration." Blackwood nodded, and "I've been watching Hayes and the railroad company for months. They've been operating beyond their authority, but gathering evidence has been difficult." He gestured to the land patents. "These documents, combined with your testimony, could finally check their power in this territory." "Why help us?" Jackson asked. "Most officials would side with the railroad, not a small Navajo community." "I served with the Indian Bureau for 20 years before this assignment," Blackwood explained. "I've seen too many treaties broken, too many communities destroyed in the name of progress." He straightened his jacket. "Wait here. I'll return after sending the telegraphs." Left alone, Jackson sank into a chair, the exhaustion of their journey finally catching up with him. They had reached the territorial capital, found a sympathetic official, and set in motion the mechanisms of government intervention. But would it be enough? And would it come in time? His thoughts turned to Najoni, waiting alone outside the city, and to the people of the Hidden Valley fighting for their survival. He had done what he could, but the outcome now depended on factors beyond his control. An hour passed before Blackwood returned his expression, a mixture of concern and determination. "The telegraphs are sent," he reported, "to the governor to Fort Wilson and to the U.S. Marshal's office requesting immediate dispatch of deputies to investigate. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, offering one to Jackson. "Now we wait for responses." Jackson accepted the drink gratefully. "How long?" "For the governor, perhaps by morning. Fort Wilson should acknowledge receipt within hours." They sat in silence for a moment, each man contemplating the gravity of events unfolding far to the north. "There's something else you should know," Blackwood said finally. "While at the telegraph office, I received news that a large party of men arrived in town late this afternoon. Railroad security personnel officially, unofficially hired guns." Jackson straightened. "Hayes, no sign of him yet, but these men are clearly searching for someone." Blackwood met Jackson's gaze directly. "You're not safe in town, Doctor. Neither are your Navajo companions if they're nearby." "She's waiting outside the city," Jackson confirmed. "We should return to her, find somewhere safe until we receive responses to your telegraphs." Blackwood nodded agreement. "I know a place, a small ranch owned by my brother-in-law about 10 miles east. You can rest there while we wait for official action." He rose, collecting a few items. "We should leave immediately before Hayes's men expand their search." Jackson's instincts told him to trust Blackwood, whose actions thus far had supported his claimed sympathies. Together, they slipped out through the hotel's service entrance, avoiding the main streets where railroad men might be watching. At the livery stable, they encountered their first obstacle. The stable hand reported that men had been asking about anyone renting or purchasing horses that day. "We need to leave the city unobserved," Blackwood murmured. "My horse is at the government stables, but retrieving it might draw attention." "Could we borrow transportation from your brother-in-law?" Jackson suggested. "His foreman delivers supplies every week," Blackwood replied, thinking quickly. "He should be at the mercantile loading dock now, preparing to return to the ranch. We can travel with him." They made their way to the mercantile's rear entrance, where, as Blackwood had predicted, a wagon was being loaded with supplies. The foreman, a weathered man introduced only as Charlie, agreed to take them without questions when Blackwood vouched for Jackson. "We need to make a stop outside town first," Jackson explained as they climbed into the wagon. "My companion is waiting there." Charlie nodded, seemingly untroubled by the mysterious request. As the wagon rumbled out of town by a back route, Jackson kept watch for pursuit, but they appeared to have slipped away undetected. They found Nijoni exactly where Jackson had left her, alert and watchful. Her expression registered surprise at seeing Jackson with a companion, but she approached cautiously when he signaled that it was safe. "This is Thomas Blackwood from the Indian Affairs Office," Jackson explained quickly. "He sent telegraphs to the governor and Fort Wilson, ordering Hayes to stand down. We're going to his brother-in-law's ranch to wait for responses." Nijoni studied Blackwood with understandable suspicion. "Why would a government official help us against the railroad?" "Because I've seen what men like Hayes do to native communities in the name of progress," Blackwood replied simply. "And because the land patents your grandfather holds are legally binding documents that I'm sworn to uphold." After a moment's consideration, Nijoni nodded and mounted her horse to follow the wagon. As they traveled through the night, Jackson briefly explained their meeting with Blackwood and the actions he had taken. "If his telegraphs are obeyed," he concluded, "Fort Wilson will recall its troops and the governor will order an investigation into Hayes's actions." "A big if," Nijoni observed. "Hayes has had 3 days to complete his plans. Much could have happened in the valley already." Jackson shared her concern, but he clung to hope. "Standing Arrow and your people are resourceful. They know the terrain, have defensive positions prepared." "Against railroad gunmen, perhaps," she replied. "But against military forces with artillery—" It was a sobering thought, one that accompanied them as they traveled through the night, toward the relative safety of Blackwood's family ranch. The ranch was modest but well-maintained, situated in rolling grasslands with mountains visible to the west. Blackwood's brother-in-law, James Wilson, welcomed them without prying questions, seemingly accustomed to his relative's involvement in sensitive territorial matters. After a much-needed meal and brief rest, Jackson, Nijoni, and Blackwood gathered in Wilson's study to discuss their next steps. A map of the territory was spread on the desk with the location of the hidden valley marked in pencil. "If the governor responds favorably to my telegraph," Blackwood explained, "he'll likely dispatch official representatives to investigate the land claims and allegations against Hayes. That could take days, however." "Standing Arrow's people may not have days," Nijoni said gravely. "What about the marshals you requested?" Jackson asked. "They would reach the valley sooner, but there are only 6 assigned to this entire territory. Against Hayes' men and potentially military forces, they would be outnumbered." They were discussing alternatives when Wilson entered with news. "Rider coming fast from the direction of town. Looks like government dispatch." Blackwood hurried outside, the others following. A dust-covered rider on a lathered horse pulled up sharply, recognizing the Indian Affairs official. "Mr. Blackwood," he called, dismounting and retrieving an envelope from his saddlebag. "Urgent response to your telegraph." Blackwood tore open the message, his expression darkening as he read. "The governor acknowledges receipt but defers action pending full investigation of alleged Indian uprising as reported by military authorities." Hayes got to him first, Jackson realized. "Worse," Blackwood continued grimly. "Fort Wilson reports that all available troops were deployed 3 days ago under Captain Hayes's command to suppress hostile activity and protect railroad operations. They claim operational necessity prevents recall at this time." "They're ignoring your orders," Nijoni said, her voice tight with anger and fear. "Not ignoring. Delaying through bureaucratic means," Blackwood clarified. "Buying time for Hayes to complete whatever he's planning." The dispatch rider cleared his throat. "There's more, sir. Word in town is that railroad company men are searching all outlying properties for a fugitive doctor and his Indian accomplice. They've offered a substantial reward." Jackson exchanged concerned glances with Nijoni and Blackwood. Their position was increasingly precarious, and official channels had failed them. "Thank you," Blackwood told the rider, pressing coins into his hand. "Rest your horse, then return to town. If questioned, you delivered routine documents and saw nothing unusual here." When the rider had gone, Blackwood turned to the others. "We've run out of legal options. The system is working exactly as Hayes intended, slowly, cautiously deferring to military judgment in matters of security." "Then what do we do?" Jackson demanded. Blackwood's expression was resolute. "We go to the hidden valley ourselves. Now, today, with the land patents and my official authority as Indian Affairs Deputy Administrator. It may not be enough to stop Hayes legally, but our presence might give him pause, create witnesses he can't eliminate easily." "It's a 3-day ride back," Nijoni pointed out. "2 if we take the direct route and fresh horses," Blackwood countered. "My brother-in-law breeds the finest stock in the territory." "It's risky," Jackson said. "Hayes will have men watching the approaches." "Do we have a better option?" Blackwood asked simply. They didn't, and all 3 knew it. Official channels had failed. Their only remaining choice was direct intervention, placing themselves physically between Hayes and his objectives. Within an hour, they were prepared to depart. Wilson provided 3 of his best horses, provisions, and weapons, including a rifle for each rider. As they mounted, Blackwood secured a saddlebag containing not just the land patents, but additional legal documents he had brought from town. "What are those?" Jackson asked. Emergency injunctions prepared for Judge Morris's signature but stamped with the territorial seal, Blackwood explained. Not strictly legal, without judicial approval, but they look official. Sometimes appearance of authority is enough to create hesitation. It was a desperate measure, but these were desperate circumstances. As they rode north at a gallop, Jackson felt both urgency and dread. They were racing back toward conflict, putting themselves directly in Hayes's path. And this time, they had no guarantee of what they would find at the Hidden Valley. 2 days of hard riding followed stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. They avoided main trails, using Najoni's knowledge of the terrain to find less traveled routes. By nightfall of the second day, they were approaching the region of the Hidden Valley. "We should proceed with caution," Najoni advised as darkness fell. "Hayes will have scouts watching all approaches." They continued at a slower pace, alert for any sign of sentries or patrols. The night was unnaturally quiet. No distant gunfire, no evidence of ongoing conflict. Whether this was good or bad, none could say. As they neared the southern approach to the valley, Najoni suddenly raised her hand, signaling a halt. "Smoke," she whispered, pointing ahead. A camp. They dismounted, securing their horses, and proceeded on foot toward the faint glow visible among the rocks. As they drew closer, they could make out figures moving around several campfires. Too many to count accurately, but dozens at least. "Military," Blackwood murmured, noting the orderly arrangement of the camp. "Fort Wilson troops." "We need to get closer, hear what they're saying," Jackson suggested. "This way," Najoni replied, leading them through a narrow draw that provided cover as they approached. From their new position, they could hear voices carried on the night air. Officers giving orders, men talking around campfires. The camp was larger than they had initially estimated, perhaps 50 soldiers, plus additional railroad personnel. "Finished by morning," one voice drifted clearly to them. "Captain Hayes wants the demolition charges placed before dawn." "Demolition charges," Jackson whispered. "What are they planning to destroy?" Najoni's face was grim in the faint reflected light. "The mountain. They're going to blow up the entrance to Turquoise Mountain." "But why?" Blackwood asked. "If they want the copper, destroying the mountain makes no sense." "Unless they're not trying to mine it," Jackson realized with growing horror. "They're trying to collapse it, seal the cave system where your people took shelter." "Bury them alive." Najoni breathed, the full enormity of Hayes' plan becoming clear. "We have to stop them." "How?" Blackwood demanded. "There are 50 armed men between us and the mountain." "How did Hayes even find this place?" Jackson whispered. "I thought the valley was completely hidden." Najoni's expression darkened. "One of our scouts, Tall Pine, didn't return from patrol 2 days ago. Thunderstone believed he was killed, but—" She hesitated. "If they captured him alive, there are ways to make a man talk." "Hayes would have no qualms about torture," Jackson said grimly, remembering the ruthlessness he'd witnessed at Whispering Mesa. "We need to find my people first," Najoni insisted. "Confirm they're still in the caves. There's another entrance, smaller, hidden. Few outsiders know of it." "Lead the way," Jackson said immediately. They retreated from the military camp, circling wide to approach the Hidden Valley from the west. Najoni guided them through increasingly difficult terrain. Narrow crevices, steep climbs, passages that seemed impossibly tight. "The soldiers would never find this route," she explained, as they squeezed through a fissure in the rock. "It was created by our ancestors as an escape path known only to the people." After nearly an hour of difficult travel, they emerged onto a narrow ledge overlooking what Jackson recognized as the southern portion of the Hidden Valley. From this elevation, the devastation was clearly visible even in the darkness. Burned structures, trampled gardens, evidence of the violent assault that had driven Standing Arrow's people into the caves. "This way," Najoni whispered, leading them along the ledge until they reached a narrow opening in the rock face, barely large enough for a person to slip through sideways. Inside, the passage widened slightly, descending deeper into the earth. They proceeded by touch, the darkness absolute, until Najoni stopped them with a soft word. "Listen," she urged. In the stillness, they heard it, the faint murmur of voices echoing through the stone, the cry of a child quickly hushed. People were still alive in the cave system. "Hello," Najoni called softly in Navajo, her voice carrying through the winding passages. "Grandfather." "It is Najoni returned with Dr. Reed." For a long moment, there was silence. Then came an answer, cautious questioning. "It is safe," Najoni replied to the unseen speaker. "We bring help." A figure appeared around a bend in the passage holding a small oil lamp that cast long shadows on the stone walls. It was Thunderstone, his face haggard with exhaustion, but his eyes alert and wary. When he recognized Najoni, relief briefly crossed his features. "You live," he said simply. "We feared the worst when you did not return." "We reached the territorial capital," she explained quickly. "Found an ally in the Indian Affairs Office. He is with us now." Thunderstone led them deeper into the cave system through winding passages that eventually opened into a large chamber. Here, illuminated by a few small fires, were the surviving members of Standing Arrow's community, perhaps 100 people, including women, children, and the elderly, along with wounded warriors being tended by Morning Sky and others. Standing Arrow himself sat near one of the small fires, his expression tired but resolute. When he saw Jackson and Najoni, he rose to his feet with dignity. "You returned," he observed, "with the documents." "Yes," Jackson confirmed. "And with Thomas Blackwood from the Indian Affairs Office. He's tried to intervene through official channels, but Hayes has manipulated the system to delay response." Blackwood stepped forward, introducing himself formally to the chief. "I regret that my office's authority has proven insufficient to stop this aggression," he said. "But I am here now in person to bear witness and do what I can." Standing Arrow acknowledged him with a nod. "We have been trapped here for 3 days," he explained. "Hayes' men and the soldiers control all main entrances. We have food and water for perhaps another 2 days, but no way to escape." "We overheard soldiers talking about demolition charges," Jackson said gravely. "We believe Hayes plans to collapse the mountain's seal you inside." Murmurs of alarm spread through the gathered people. Standing Arrow raised a hand for silence. "When?" he asked simply. "Before dawn," Najoni replied. "We have only hours." The chief absorbed this information with remarkable composure. "Then we must act quickly. What do you propose?" Jackson, Najoni, and Blackwood exchanged glances, each acutely aware that no easy solution presented itself. They were 3 people against a military force with 100 civilian lives at stake. "I could try to reach the soldiers' commander," Blackwood suggested. "Present the land patents, invoke my official authority, demand they cease operations pending territorial review." "Hayes is their commander," Thunderstone pointed out. "He will not be swayed by documents or legal authority." "Then we need to remove Hayes," Jackson said quietly. "Without him giving orders, the military might hesitate to proceed with such a drastic action." "You propose to kill him?" Standing Arrow asked, studying Jackson closely. "No," Jackson replied firmly. "To expose him, to reveal his true motives to his men and superiors. Hayes isn't acting on official orders in planning to collapse this mountain. He's pursuing personal vengeance and covering up past crimes." Blackwood nodded slowly. Many soldiers would refuse to participate if they understood they were being used to murder innocent civilians rather than suppress hostiles. "How do we reach them?" Najoni asked. "Hayes will not allow you near his men." A silence fell over the group as they grappled with the seemingly impossible challenge. Then Morning Sky, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. "There is a way," she said, her ancient voice carrying clearly in the chamber. "A path through the mountain itself, emerging near where the soldiers camp. It is dangerous, known only to our oldest medicine people." "Grandmother," Najoni began worriedly, "that path hasn't been used in generations. Parts may have collapsed." "I have walked it in my dreams," Morning Sky replied with serene certainty. "It remains open." Standing Arrow considered this information. "If this path exists, it could allow us to position people behind the soldiers' camp, create a diversion, while others approach from the front with the documents." "A dangerous gamble," Thunderstone cautioned. "Have we any better option?" the chief asked simply. No one did. With dawn approaching and Hayes's demolition plan set to proceed, they had run out of alternatives. "I'll go with Morning Sky through the mountain passage," Jackson volunteered. "Blackwood should approach openly from the front, with the land patents and his official authority. Najoni and Thunderstone can lead a small group to create a diversion if needed." Standing Arrow nodded approval. "So it shall be." As they prepared for their desperate mission, Jackson found himself once again checking his medical supplies, a habit born of years of practice. Whatever happened in the coming hours, people would likely need his care. Morning Sky approached him, carrying a small leather pouch. "For courage," she said, offering him what appeared to be dried herbs. "And clarity of purpose." Jackson accepted the gift with appropriate respect. "Will this mountain path truly lead us behind the soldiers' camp?" The elderly woman's eyes held the same penetrating quality they had when she first examined his wounds beside the dead mountain lion. "It will lead you where you need to go," she replied enigmatically. "The mountain knows its children." Before Jackson could question her meaning, Standing Arrow called them together for final instructions. The plan was simple by necessity. Jackson and Morning Sky would traverse the secret passage emerging behind the military camp. Blackwood would approach from the main trail with the land patents and official injunctions demanding to speak with the commanding officer. Thunderstone, Najoni, and a small group of warriors would position themselves to create a diversion if needed, or to help evacuate the cave dwellers if an opportunity arose. "Remember," Standing Arrow told them, "our goal is not to defeat these soldiers in battle. It is to prevent them from carrying out Hayes's plan long enough for truth to be heard." With those words of caution, the groups separated, each moving toward their designated positions. Jackson followed Morning Sky deeper into the cave system, away from the main chamber where the community sheltered. She carried a small oil lamp that cast wavering shadows on the ancient walls. "How far does this passage extend?" Jackson asked, as they navigated increasingly narrow tunnels. "To the heart of Turquoise Mountain," Morning Sky replied. "Our ancestors created it centuries ago, both as an escape route and as a path to sacred places within the mountain." The passage twisted and turned, sometimes requiring them to crawl through tight spaces, other times opening into small chambers with ceiling heights that allowed them to stand. Throughout, Jackson noticed veins of turquoise embedded in the rock, thin ribbons of blue-green that seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight. "The tears of the spirits," Morning Sky said, noticing his attention to the stones. "They weep for the living, for the suffering that must be endured in this world." After what seemed like hours, but was likely less, they reached a junction where the passage split in 3 directions. "Which way?" Jackson asked, uncertain. Morning Sky stood motionless, her eyes closed, seemingly listening to something only she could hear. "This one," she finally said, pointing to the rightmost passage. "It leads to where we must go." The tunnel she indicated sloped upward, becoming steeper as they progressed. Jackson's wounds protested the exertion, but he pushed through the pain, aware that lives depended on their success. Eventually, the passage narrowed to a vertical shaft, with crude handholds carved into the stone. Morning Sky, despite her age, climbed with surprising agility, Jackson following close behind. Above them, a faint grayish light suggested they were nearing the surface. "Dawn approaches," Morning Sky whispered as they reached the top of the shaft. "We must move carefully now." The passage ended in a narrow opening partially concealed by brush and rocks. Morning Sky extinguished the lamp, and they peered cautiously outside. They had emerged on a rocky slope overlooking the military camp, now bustling with pre-dawn activity. Soldiers moved with purpose, loading equipment onto mules. At the center of this activity stood Captain Hayes, issuing orders to a group of men who appeared to be engineers or demolition experts. "There," Jackson whispered, pointing to bundles being carried toward the main entrance to the cave system. "The explosives." From their position, they could see the entire operation, and, more importantly, they could be seen by everyone in the camp if they revealed themselves. Jackson scanned the perimeter, looking for signs of Blackwood or the diversionary team, but saw nothing yet. "What now?" he asked quietly. Morning Sky's weathered face was calm in the growing light. "Now we wait for the mountain to show us the path." As if in response to her words, a distant shout came from the opposite side of the camp. Soldiers turned, rifles raised as a lone figure approached along the main trail, Blackwood carrying a document case and moving with the confident bearing of a government official. "I require immediate audience with the commanding officer." His voice carried clearly in the dawn stillness. "By authority of the Territorial Indian Affairs Office." Hayes stepped forward, visibly surprised by the official's appearance. "Mr. Blackwood, this is an active military operation in a restricted area. Your presence is neither required nor welcome." "On the contrary, Captain," Blackwood replied, his voice projecting for all to hear. "I have received disturbing reports about unauthorized actions against legally recognized landholders. I have here," he held up the document case, "territorial land patents granting ownership of this valley and mountain to the Navajo community you are currently besieging." Hayes gestured, and two soldiers moved to block Blackwood's approach. "Those documents are irrelevant. We are responding to an Indian uprising that threatened railroad operations and white settlers." "A fabricated uprising," Blackwood countered, "created to justify the seizure of valuable resources. These demolition charges you're placing, are they authorized by territorial or federal authorities?" Hayes's expression darkened. "I don't need authorization to suppress hostile action. Collapsing a mountain to bury women and children is not suppression, Captain. It's massacre." The exchange had drawn the attention of every soldier in the camp. Jackson could see uncertainty in many faces, ordinary men following orders, now hearing those orders questioned by a government official. "This is our moment," he whispered to Morning Sky. "We need to draw attention while Blackwood keeps Hayes distracted." The elderly woman nodded, reaching into a pouch at her waist and removing what appeared to be a polished turquoise stone about the size of a hen's egg. In the growing light, Jackson could see it had been carefully cut and polished to form multiple reflective surfaces. "The sacred stone of our ancestors," Morning Sky explained quietly, "cut from the heart of the mountain itself." As the first rays of sunlight crested the horizon, she held up the stone at a precise angle. The polished facets caught the light and refracted it into brilliant beams of blue-green that danced across the mountainside, creating a display unlike anything Jackson had ever seen. The unusual spectacle, impossible to mistake for a natural phenomenon, immediately drew the attention of every soldier in the camp. In that moment of distraction, Jackson stood and called out in his strongest voice, "Captain William Hayes is acting without authorization. He plans to murder innocent civilians to cover up his past crimes at Whispering Mesa." All eyes turned toward them, including Hayes's, whose face contorted with rage when he recognized Jackson. "Reed!" he shouted. "Arrest that man! He's deranged, conspiring with hostiles." But the soldiers hesitated, confused by the conflicting claims of authority and the unexpected appearances of both a territorial official and a white doctor, apparently allied with the Navajo. In that moment of hesitation, movement erupted from the eastern slope. Thunderstone and his warriors creating the planned diversion by firing rifles into the air and shouting battle cries that echoed off the stone walls. Chaos ensued. Some soldiers turned toward the new threat, others remained focused on Blackwood or Jackson. Hayes shouted contradictory orders, trying to regain control of the situation. Jackson seized the opportunity to scramble down the slope toward the camp morning sky, following with remarkable agility for her age. They needed to reach Blackwood to combine their voices in challenging Hayes' authority. As they neared the camp perimeter, shots rang out. Jackson felt the burn as a bullet grazed his arm, but he kept moving. Morning sky remained close behind him, seemingly untouched by the sporadic fire. They reached Blackwood just as Hayes pushed through the confused soldiers toward them, his hand on his sidearm. "Enough!" Hayes shouted. "This is military business. You are interfering with a lawful operation." "There's nothing lawful about what you're planning," Jackson countered, standing shoulder to shoulder with Blackwood. "These people have legal title to this land. They've committed no hostile acts. You attacked them to clear the way for railroad expansion and to eliminate witnesses to your crimes at Whispering Mesa." Hayes drew his pistol. "You've always been a problem, Reed. Too righteous for your own good." "Put down your weapon, Captain," Blackwood ordered, his voice steady. "These actions are not sanctioned by territorial authority." "My authority comes from military necessity," Hayes snarled. "These savages attacked railroad operations." "That's a lie," came a new voice. Najoni had appeared from the eastern slope, moving to join Jackson and the others. "The railroad attacked our people, burned our homes, drove us into the caves. They want our mountain for its copper." The soldiers looked increasingly uncertain, glancing between Hayes and the group confronting him. One officer stepped forward cautiously. "Captain, perhaps we should verify these land claims before proceeding with demolition," he suggested. Hayes turned on him furiously. "Lieutenant, I gave you an order. Place those charges now." "Sir, if these people have legal title—" "They're Indians," Hayes shouted, his control slipping. "Their claims mean nothing against the needs of progress. Their claims are recognized by territorial law." Blackwood insisted, opening his case and holding up the land patents for all to see. "Any action against them without due process is illegal. Any soldier participating will be subject to prosecution." Hayes seemed to realize he was losing control of his men. In a desperate move, he grabbed the land patents from Blackwood's hands and tore them in half. "There are your precious documents," he sneered. "Now place those charges as ordered." But his action had the opposite effect than intended. The soldiers witnessed their commanding officer destroying legal documents, an act that confirmed the accusations against him. Murmurs spread through the ranks as men exchanged troubled glances. An older sergeant with a weathered face stepped forward. "The papers had government seals, sir. That's not right." "Lieutenant Parker," Hayes snapped at his second-in-command, "control your men." Lieutenant Parker, a tall man with steady eyes who had served under Hayes for 3 years, stepped forward instead. The lieutenant had been growing increasingly disturbed by Hayes's methods since arriving in the territory, but had maintained his silence out of military discipline. Now facing the prospect of burying women and children alive, something inside him broke. "Men," Parker said, turning to address the soldiers, "we took an oath to protect American citizens and uphold the law. These people have legal title to this land. What we're being asked to do," he looked directly at Hayes, "is not a lawful order." Several soldiers nodded in agreement, lowering their rifles. "This is mutiny," Hayes shouted, his face contorted with rage. "No, sir," Parker replied calmly. "It's conscience." "Sir," the lieutenant said firmly, "I cannot in good conscience follow that order. Nor, I believe, can my men." Hayes looked around wildly, seeing the resolve draining from his troops. With a curse, he raised his pistol, aiming directly at Jackson. "You've been a thorn in my side since Whispering Mesa," he snarled. "I should have dealt with you then." Before he could fire, Thunderstone's powerful form slammed into him from the side, driving him to the ground. The pistol discharged harmlessly into the air as the two men struggled. Other Navajo warriors emerged from hiding not to attack, but to stand with their leaders. The soldiers seeing they faced not hostile raiders, but a community defending its home, lowered their weapons. Hayes, pinned by Thunderstone, continued to shout orders that no one obeyed. His authority had evaporated with his actions and revelations. In the confusion, Porter, the railroad representative who had orchestrated the initial threats against Jackson, slipped away unnoticed. He mounted his horse at the edge of camp and rode hard toward the east, no doubt to report this unexpected development to his superiors. "Let him go," Blackwood told Jackson, who had spotted Porter's escape. "His employers will soon face legal consequences of their own. The territorial governor will want to know about a corporation that employs private armies and conspires to destroy legal land patents." "Horizon Rail has powerful connections," Jackson warned. "Yes, but even powerful men fear public scandal," Blackwood replied. "And burying innocent women and children alive is a scandal no amount of money can quiet." The lieutenant who had questioned Hayes approached Blackwood. "Sir, I believe we've been misled about this operation. These demolition charges," he gestured to the bundles of explosives. "We were told they were to clear a safe passage, not to bury people alive," Blackwood finished grimly. "Captain Hayes has been pursuing a personal vendetta, Lieutenant, using military resources to do so." As the reality of what they had nearly participated in dawned on the soldiers, a palpable shift occurred. Men who moments before had been preparing to follow orders now looked ashamed, angry at being manipulated. Standing Arrow emerged from the cave entrance, dignified despite days of siege. He approached the gathering, his presence commanding respect. "We have never sought conflict with your people," he addressed the lieutenant. "We wish only to live peacefully on land that is legally ours, to protect our sacred mountain and the waters that sustain life." The lieutenant removed his hat in a gesture of respect. "Chief, on behalf of the military detachment, I apologize for this action. We were not fully informed of the circumstances." Hayes, still restrained by Thunderstone, shouted obscenities and threats. The lieutenant ordered him formally placed under arrest, charged with exceeding his authority and falsifying reports to territorial officials. As the morning sun illuminated the valley fully, Jackson stood with Najoni Blackwood and Morning Sky, watching as soldiers began dismantling the demolition charges they had so recently been preparing to place. The crisis had been averted not through violence, but through truth exposed at the critical moment. Standing Arrow approached them, his weathered face showing the fatigue of the ordeal, but also profound relief. "You have saved my people," he said simply. "All of you." "The fight isn't over," Blackwood cautioned. "The railroad still wants this land. Hayes was their instrument, but not their only one." "But we have time now," Jackson observed. "Time to make sure your legal claims are recognized at the highest levels to prevent this from happening again." Standing Arrow nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps what we need is a permanent voice in the territorial government. Someone who understands both worlds, who can speak for our interests when decisions are made." His gaze rested meaningfully on Jackson. "Someone who has proven his willingness to risk everything for justice." Jackson understood what was being suggested. After years of isolation of running from human connection, he was being offered a purpose that drew on both his medical knowledge and his newfound understanding of the complex interactions between cultures in the territory. "I'm not a politician," he said hesitantly. "No," Standing Arrow agreed. "You are a healer, and perhaps that is exactly what is needed. Someone who seeks to heal the divisions between peoples, not exploit them." As the sun climbed higher, the people of the Hidden Valley emerged from the caves, blinking in the daylight, embracing loved ones, surveying the damage to their settlement. There would be rebuilding to do, wounds to heal, trusts to restore. But they had survived. Their mountain still stood, and their future, while uncertain, remained their own to shape. Jackson watched as Najoni moved among her people, checking on the injured, offering comfort and care. Morning Sky stood nearby, her ancient eyes meeting his with that same penetrating gaze that had assessed him beside the dead mountain lion days earlier. "The vision is complete," she said quietly. "You came as I saw you would. A healer with blood on his hands who would stand between my people and destruction." "I'm not sure I deserve such credit," Jackson replied. "I nearly failed multiple times." "The path to healing is never straight," Morning Sky observed. "It winds like the passages through the mountain. But if one persists, it leads where it must." As the military began their withdrawal, taking Hayes into custody and leaving only a small detachment to assist with rebuilding efforts, Jackson found himself at a crossroads, unlike any he had faced before. His isolated ranch was gone, his old life destroyed. But in its place, new possibilities had emerged, a role advocating for justice, a community that valued his skills, people who had become more than allies in their shared struggle. Standing at the entrance to the Hidden Valley, looking out over the landscape that had nearly witnessed another tragedy, Jackson felt something he had not experienced since losing his family. A sense of belonging, of purpose beyond mere survival. Najoni joined him, following his gaze across the terrain. "What will you do now?" she asked. Jackson considered the question carefully. "I think I need to finish what we've started. Make sure your grandfather's land patents are properly recognized, that Hayes faces justice for his actions." After a pause, he added, "And perhaps learn more about combining our different healing traditions. There's wisdom in both that could benefit everyone in this territory." She nodded, a hint of approval in her expression. "The wounded healer carries the strongest medicine," she said, echoing her grandfather's words. "Your pain has shaped you, but it no longer defines you." Together they turned back toward the village where rebuilding had already begun. The boundaries that had once separated them, of culture, experience, and trust, hadn't disappeared, but they had become crossable. In that crossing lay hope, not just for Jackson or for Standing Arrow's people, but for a territory struggling to define itself amidst the competing demands of progress and tradition. As Morning Sky had said, The mountain knew its children. Perhaps Jackson reflected it was time he recognized that he, too, belonged to this harsh, beautiful land, and the future being forged upon it. That night, as stars wheeled overhead and cook fires burned low, Standing Arrow called the people together. In a ceremony that blended traditional Navajo customs with new elements, Jackson Reed was formally welcomed into the community. No longer an outsider, no longer alone. The wounds that had defined him for so long began at last to truly heal. Days became weeks. The soldiers departed, leaving only memories of the confrontation. Hayes was taken east to stand trial. Blackwood returned to the territorial capital with promises of continued support. And through it all, the people of the valley, Jackson now among them, worked to rebuild what had been damaged and strengthen what remained. The story of what happened spread through the territory, changing perceptions, challenging assumptions. A white doctor who had stood with the Navajo. A hidden valley preserved by law rather than force. A future being written by many hands instead of few. 3 months later, the morning sun cast long shadows across the hidden valley now transformed by rebuilding efforts. Where charred ruins had stood, new structures rose a blend of traditional hogans and more permanent wooden buildings. At the center of the settlement stood a new building with a sign in both English and Navajo, Reed Nijoni Healing Lodge. Inside, Jackson examined a young Navajo boy with a persistent cough, while Nijoni prepared a mixture of herbs at a nearby table. The integration of their medical traditions had created something unique. Western diagnostic techniques combined with Navajo herbal remedies and healing ceremonies. Patients came from miles around, both native and settler alike. "Just a minor infection," Jackson assured the boy's mother. "This medicine will help clear his lungs, but he should also drink plenty of water and rest." After the patient left, Thunderstone entered, carrying an official-looking envelope bearing the territorial governor's seal. "This arrived for you," he said, handing it to Jackson. While still reserved, the warrior had developed a grudging respect for the doctor in the months since their confrontation with Hayes. Jackson opened the letter and scanned its contents, his expression brightening. "Good news?" Nijoni asked, coming to stand beside him. "The best," he replied. "The governor has officially recognized Standing Arrow's land patents and extended them to include Turquoise Mountain. No mining will be permitted within 20 miles of the sacred sites." "And Hayes?" Thunderstone asked. "Sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison for conspiracy falsifying military reports and attempted murder," Jackson said. "The Horizon Rail Company has been fined heavily and placed under federal oversight. Their expansion plans have been permanently halted." That evening, as the community gathered for a celebration feast, Jackson sat beside Standing Arrow near the council fire. The elderly chief seemed to have regained some of his vigor in the months since the crisis. "You have found your purpose here," Standing Arrow observed, watching as Jackson interacted easily with the Navajo families he had come to know. "I have," Jackson agreed. "For years after I lost my family, I was merely surviving. Now," he looked around at the rebuilt community at Nijoni, teaching some children about medicinal plants at Morning Sky, watching them all with those knowing eyes. "Now I'm living again." Standing Arrow nodded satisfied. "The wounded healer has become whole." Later, as the moon rose over Turquoise Mountain, Jackson and Nijoni stood on a ridge overlooking the valley. Their relationship had evolved gradually from reluctant allies to partners in healing, and perhaps something more, a bond forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. "Morning Sky tells me you're learning our language," Nijoni remarked. "Slowly," Jackson admitted with a smile. "Your grandmother is patient. but I think sometimes she finds my pronunciation amusing." Najoni laughed softly, the sound still rare enough to be precious. "She says you have the spirit of our people, even if your tongue struggles with our words." Below them, the valley thrived. The boundaries that had once seemed impassable between cultures, between past and present, between strangers and family, had not disappeared, but they had become crossable. In that crossing lay healing not just for Jackson Reed or for Standing Arrow's people, but for a land divided by misunderstanding and greed. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Najoni asked after a comfortable silence. Jackson thought of his isolated ranch of the years spent in solitary grief. "No," he said honestly. "I was existing, not living. Here." He looked at her. "I've found something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope," he said simply, "and a home that isn't defined by walls or fences, but by the people who share it." As they returned to the valley, Jackson felt the weight of his past finally lifting. Elizabeth and Sarah would always be in his heart, but their memory no longer condemned him to solitude. His path had led him here to this valley, to these people, to a purpose that honored his skills as a healer while healing his own wounded spirit. The mountain knew its children, as Morning Sky had said, and Jackson Reed had finally come home.